Introduction: the river of friction, the illusion of the linear current. The physical universe does not obey wall clocks. It obeys the tyranny of mass. However, the human mind has been infected since its conception with the most destructive psychological illusion of its evolutionary history, the perception of time as an inescapable linear current. From the first breath, inferior biology convinces you. You are convinced that you are trapped in the river of friction. You perceive time as a furious flow, moving inexorably in a single direction, dragging your youth, your opportunities, and your capital toward the inevitable waterfall of death. This perception of time flowing is not a cosmological law. It is simply a mechanism. It is the mechanism that your own mammalian brain uses to justify and measure the deterioration of its own cells. By blindly believing in this illusory river, the organism enters a state of perpetual biological emergency. You feel that the days are slipping through your fingers. You feel terror and the animal need to run. You feel the need to hurry to secure success before the calendar declares you obsolete. That constant haste generates an atrocious kinetic friction in your psyche. You must diagnose this urgency not as ambition, but as a lethal thermal disease. When you operate under the yoke of the clock, the friction of your own anxiety burns you. It raises your basal temperature, calcining your logical decisions, evaporating your strategic clarity, and burning your assets before they can materialize. The human who runs fleeing from tomorrow is the perfect slave. His panic prevents him from stopping long enough to accumulate the inertial gravity needed to warp his environment. To govern the material ecosystem, you must execute the extirpation of this chronological illusion. You must abandon the turbulent waters of the river and embrace the static density of higher physics. General relativity demonstrates that time is not an absolute master, but a malleable variable, an elastic fabric that bends. It slows down and surrenders in the presence of a mass heavy enough. The lethal operator does not compete against the hands of the clock. He paralyzes them. By stopping emotional agitation, turning off the engine of urgency, and anchoring yourself in the present millisecond with psychopathic heaviness, you acquire hyperdensity. You acquire the immaterial hyperdensity that forces the universe to orbit your unshakable stillness. This is the threshold of your new mental architecture. You begin the construction of the crystal prison. It is not a structure of punitive confinement, but a perimeter of inertial stasis where the laws of temporal wear are suspended. You will learn to manipulate your psychological gravity to freeze time over your empire. Inside this perfect geometry, entropy dies from freezing and matter obeys the static mandate of a monarch who has decided to stop flowing forever. The crystal prison is the definitive rejection of human expiration and biological decay. By encapsulating your mind in this vacuum of total immobility, you protect your domains from biological oxidation and collective hysteria. Prepare to mutilate impatience and sit on an unalterable throne where you dictate the slowness with which the cosmos breathes. You are the weight that forces the hands of time to snap and stop. Chapter 1. The Gravity of the Present, Warping Local Space-Time. The Slave's Relativity, the Absolute Time Fraud. The most devastating cognitive error of inferior biology is the belief in a universal and absolute time. Humanity operates under the premise that time is an unalterable dictator, a cosmic clock ticking at the same pace for king and beggar alike. Under this false doctrine, the weak mind assumes its only option is to run and catch up. The weak mind competes hysterically against the oxidation of its own cells. Subject this illusion to higher physics. General relativity proved over a century ago that absolute time does not exist. Time and space form a single, malleable and elastic fabric. The speed at which time passes is strictly relative to two factors. These factors are the observer's displacement speed and the gravitational mass of the environment. The greater the gravitational field, the slower time flows. Near an infinitely dense object, time, from an external perspective, seems to stop entirely. The lethal operator transplants this astrophysical law into power psychology. The slave is a light entity. Lacking immaterial weight, identity, iron purpose, emotional stasis, he is easily pushed by society's currents. He runs, despairs, pursues success, and reacts to every stimulus. His high speed of mental agitation causes his subjective time to evaporate. To submit time, you must stop being the comet. You must stop being the comet burning in the atmosphere and transmute into the white dwarf star around which comets orbit. You must increase your psychological density until reaching a critical mass that warps time perception in your local ecosystem. This is called acquiring the gravity of the present. You become the static axis. The hyperdensity equation, subtracting movement. In the 3D plane, mass is acquired by accumulating matter. In the operator's metaphysics, hyperdensity, immaterial mass, is acquired inversely, through the total subtraction of useless movement and the eradication of emotional friction. How do you become heavy? By stopping your movement. You must become a localized singularity. Anxiety about the future is a leak of your mass toward a temporal coordinate that does not exist. Nostalgia for the past is a leak toward a graveyard of dead photons. When your mind is divided between what was and what will be, your presence in the now is translucent and light. Any market wind can blow you away easily. To warp local spacetime, you must summon your entire immaterial voltage and anchor it brutally, paramilitarily, and deftly in the exact millisecond you inhabit. You sit at your operations center and cut the threads tying you to expectations. You mentally cancel tomorrow. You force consciousness to recognize the present point. The only geometric coordinate where matter can be manipulated and power exercised is the infinitesimal point of the present. By concentrating 100% of your existence on a single point, that point acquires infinite weight. You have created a gravitational well. The universe has no choice but to settle around you. Bending the fabric of reality, the inertial funnel. Imagine spacetime as a perfectly tensioned elastic sheet. If you place a marble on it, it will barely create a depression. The marble lacks the gravity to attract other objects. This is the presence of the average human. If he wants another marble to approach, he must push it manually through friction, effort, and sweat. Now, imagine placing a sphere of solid osmium in the center of that same sheet. The weight is so overwhelming that the sheet sinks deeply, creating a massive funnel. Any object, financial opportunities, capital, human talent, passing near that depression will stop traveling in a straight line. It will be dragged to the bottom. It will be inevitably drawn to the bottom of the funnel by the law of gravitational attraction. The creator who has consolidated the gravity of the present operates like that osmium sphere. You do not pursue your goals, because pursuing requires leaving your central position, losing your hyperdensity to become a moving object. You nail yourself to the throne of the present. You become so immensely present and inscrutable in your stasis that the social and economic topography around you warps. Matter perceives the immense vacuum of your need. It discovers you are in no hurry and fear no loss. That vacuum of expectation is thermodynamically irresistible. Resources roll toward you not because you ran after them, but because your absolute lethargy warped the ground beneath their feet. You are the center of a suction well that forces the simulation to deliver its assets to your coordinates. You do not work for the result. The result slides down the curve of your own presence. The veto on lightness, eradicating distraction. To sustain this gravitational well without it collapsing, you must subject your psychology to a draconian diet. You must establish the veto on lightness. Lightness is any mental or physical activity that dilutes your inertial density. Talking excessively, justifying decisions, or consuming hysterical entertainment are leaks. Debating hypothetical scenarios not under your control or allowing others' panic to contaminate your breath are acts of lightness. Every time you participate in society's empty chatter, you are giving away electrons of your own gravity. You are allowing the atmospheric pressure of your core to leak outward into the void. The lethal operator imposes acoustic and mental hermeticism upon his being. You speak only when sound is an irreversible mandate. You act only when action is a scalpel-altering matter. The rest of the time, you maintain the geological silence of a mountain. This refusal to participate in human lightness increases your mass. Those who interact with you will feel an inexplicable pressure in their chest, a discomfort born from the abyssal difference in densities. Your mere physical presence will become suffocating for the weak and magnetic for high-value matter. By being heavy and silent, you force the environment to stabilize around your axis. Static observation, the collapse of urgency. The most aggressive training to forge the gravity of the present is the mastery of static observation in the face of crisis. The human nervous system is coded for fight or flight. When an unexpected event hits, a market crash or a corporate betrayal, the amygdala injects cortisol and demands a reaction. It demands speed. Responding immediately to a crisis is submitting to the aggressor's time tyranny. It is confessing that the event has the power to alter your temperature and inertia. When the environment bursts into flames, the hyper-dense creator executes static observation. You freeze. You receive the impact and forbid any muscle spasm. You apply a deliberate and psychopathic delay between stimulus and response. In that interval of total immobility, time around you begins to dilate. While others run in fast motion, consumed by their own hysteria, you observe the anatomy of the problem with narcotic slowness. You are a scientist inspecting a specimen. By not reacting, you absorb the room's urgency and drown it in your gravitational well. You force the crisis into your temporal frame. The threat, coming with kinetic speed, crashes against the wall of your inaction and loses all its momentum. You have disarmed the bomb simply by refusing to recognize its detonator clock. The murder of the meanwhile, repudiating the wait. One of the most pathetic symptoms of linear time perception is the invention of waiting. Humans spend their lives waiting. They wait for Friday, wait to get paid, wait for the market to improve, or wait for someone to love them. Deep psychology tells us that waiting is a state of insufficiency and biological lack. Whoever waits is subconsciously declaring that the present millisecond is defective or unworthy, and that salvation lies in a future coordinate. Waiting is the transit room for slaves. In the crystal prison architecture, the murder of the meanwhile is executed. The gravitational monarch never waits. You are always whole. You act with destructive violence upon matter, or you rest in absolute stasis, but you never remain suspended in the purgatory of expectation. If you issued an expropriation mandate and the universe requires time to restructure its atoms, you do not wait, you disconnect. You withdraw focal attention and sink into the now. The manifestation paradox states that reality takes longer when the observer watches the door with anxiety, because anxiety freezes the wave function in a state of lack. By murdering the wait and becoming radically indifferent to the when, you destroy time's resistance. The empire crystallizes at an obscene speed. The sovereignty of occupied space, somatic anchoring. For the metaphysics of time to transform into a physical weapon of domination, it must be anchored in the body. The carbon container is not the enemy, it is the presence calibration sensor. This is called the sovereignty of occupied space. The anxious individual ni siquiera inhabits his own body. He is a ghost. His mind floats kilometers ahead, projecting imaginary misfortunes. His physical movements are clumsy or defensive. The operator establishes total somatic anchoring. You feel the weight of your bones against the chair. You are aware of the atmospheric pressure on your skin. Every movement is executed with absolute precision. You own the geometric space your body displaces in the air. When you enter a boardroom, you do not do it as a visitor. You do it as the tectonic plate that just claimed ownership of the terrain. This brutal occupation of physical space sends an undeniable electromagnetic signal. There is an organism that is not dissociated. There is an organism that does not flee the present and possesses unshakable thermal density. Somatic anchoring is the visible manifestation of your invisible hyperdensity. When your body is as still as your mind, you become an immovable object. The world has no choice but to become the force that stops against your mass. Relative dilation of the adversary, accelerating others' ruin. General relativity affects your relationship with other bodies. When you reach the gravity of the present and slow your own biological and psychological clock, you produce a devastating effect on competitors, relative dilation. In a power conflict, the clash is always resolved in favor of the one with the lower frequency. The 3D competitor operates with a very high temporal metabolism. They have deadlines, shareholders, and flammable egos demanding daily results. They are engines spinning at 10,000 revolutions per minute. You, from your gravitational well, become the environment that resists their movement. You are the friction. By refusing to accelerate your pace to match theirs, you force them to overexert. To try to move your monolith, they must spend astronomical amounts of kinetic energy. Their minds, trapped in haste, begin to make mathematical errors. They bleed capital. Their internal clock perceives your slowness as a mockery. In their urge to destroy you quickly, they calcine their own empire. You haven't had to launch a single offensive. You used the atrocious weight of your static present to force the enemy to run until dying of a thermodynamic heart attack. You turned time mastery into a siege weapon that accelerates the entropy of others. The tyranny of the millisecond, destructive micro-focus. The inferior mind is frightened by years or decades. The slave is overwhelmed, thinking how he will maintain his empire for a lifetime. This is a design flaw. The creator, residing in the crystal prison, reduces his spectrum of concern to a microscopic unit of measurement, the tyranny of the millisecond. Quantum physics shows the universe is not a continuous flow, but a series of discrete flashes turning on and off at the speed of the Planck scale. Your empire is not sustained by years, it is sustained by the integrity of the decision you take in the current fraction of a second. If you stabilize the now, you stabilize all. If you can stabilize your iridium core, eliminate fear, and exert absolute zero in the exact millisecond you are breathing, you have won. The past no longer exists to threaten you. The future has not crystallized to claim you. All the weight of your existence condenses into the perfection of the now. You are final. By governing the millisecond with aseptic cruelty, you find the years take care of themselves. The greatness of a legacy or a fortune is not the result of an anxious long-term plan, but the accumulation of trillions of milliseconds governed under the same tyranny of unalterable stillness. You enslave eternity by the now, the vertex of curved space. Look at yourself in your sterilized operations chamber, having amputated the linear clock and crushed the biological calendar's tyranny. You managed to suffocate the slave's relativity. You understood haste and anxious movement were symptoms of a mass-lacking entity burning in the atmosphere of its own hysteria. It is over. You executed the hyperdensity equation, subtracting all psychological movement toward the past or future to condense your mass into the only real point. You became the gravitational well. You bent reality's sheet by suppressing need, forcing capital and submission to fall into your funnel instead of begging for them. You established the veto on lightness, sealing your lips and mind against the biomass's thermal distraction. You applied static observation to crisis fires, delaying your response to disarm the aggressor through lethargy. You murdered the, meanwhile, annihilating the waiting state to always operate from totality. You anchored your body to the 3D plane with the sovereignty of occupied space, and used relative dilation to force the adversary to calcine in his own urgency. Finally, you assumed the tyranny of the millisecond, embracing the destructive micro-focus that guarantees your empire's invulnerability one instant at a time. Chapter 2. Thermodynamics of Urgency, the Murder of Haste. The Physics of Agitation, Entropy and Matter Degradation. To master the architecture of time, the operator must subject his behavior to the unshakable laws of thermodynamics. Physics establishes that heat is the macroscopic manifestation of microscopic agitation. When particles move quickly, they collide erratically. These collisions generate friction. Friction generates heat. And heat inexorably accelerates the structural degradation of matter, leading the system toward its maximum entropy, total disorder, dissipation, and death. Subject this physical law to the psychology of human behavior. What is haste? Haste is the psychological equivalent of thermal agitation. When an individual feels urgency to reach a goal or close a deal, their mind enters a state of accelerated molecular movement. They agitate. They change strategies constantly. They speak faster. They take decisions based on the pressure of the clock and not on the geometric density of convenience. By agitating, the individual generates a monstrous kinetic friction against the surrounding ecosystem. That friction raises their basal temperature. They start to sweat desperation. And exactly as the second law of thermodynamics dictates, that internal heat accelerates the degradation of their own assets. Haste burns capital, calcines relationships, and evaporates opportunities before they have the physical time to crystallize. Whoever operates with urgency is, literally, destroying their own empire through the combustion of their anxiety. To build the crystal prison, you must first extinguish the fire of your own hurry. Haste as the fire of incompetence, the terror of lack. Deep psychology demands we diagnose the origin of this agitation. A hyper-dense creator does not run, mountains do not run, black holes do not run. Frenetic movement is exclusive to biological prey trying to escape the jaws of a predator, or starving organisms running toward food for fear another will snatch it. Therefore, haste is the empirical proof of metaphysical incompetence. When you hurry, you are emitting a thermodynamic declaration to the universe. I doubt this belongs to me. I doubt my gravitational mass is enough to attract it, so I must run to catch it with my own hands before it disappears. Urgency is the fire of those who doubt. It is the public confession of your terror of scarcity. If quantum mechanics dictates that your focused intention collapses the wave function of probability into matter, doubting that collapse is injecting chaos into the equation. Doubting is a thermal leak that dilutes your power. If you know with unmovable and aseptic certainty that the objective is already yours in the immaterial plane, running toward it is pathetic. The lethal operator murders haste because he understands urgency is the gravest insult the biological ego can hurl at the infallibility of his own consciousness. The biology of panic, the wear of cortisol. You must observe urgency from the physiology of your own carbon vehicle. Evolution designed the sympathetic nervous system to activate the fight or flight response. When the environment demands haste, the adrenal glands flood the bloodstream with adrenaline and cortisol. The heart rate skyrockets. Blood leaves the prefrontal cortex, the center of logical and strategic thinking, and flows to the limbs to allow the run. In the prehistoric jungle, this guaranteed survival. In the creation of financial and territorial empires, it is suicide. You are operating with the chemistry of a frightened animal. When you operate under the tyranny of the clock, you force your body to live in a state of perpetual emergency. You take corporate and vital decisions with a brain soaked in fear hormones, deprived of its superior analytical capacity. This sustained effort wears down the chassis irreversibly. The human ages, gets sick, and loses hyperdensity not from physical work, but from the chemical poison his own temporal anxiety forces him to swallow. To construct the crystal prison, you must turn off this mechanism. You must force your biology to operate under the lethargic cadence of the apex of the food chain. The veto on reactive acceleration, the space between stimulus and response. The outside world is an incessant storm of stimuli designed to steal your stillness. Economic crises, demands from subordinates, and social emergencies are calibrated to demand your immediate attention. They scream, "Act now!" The lethal operator responds by instating the veto on reactive acceleration. The thermodynamic freedom of the creator resides exclusively in the fraction of a second between the external stimulus and the internal response. The slave lacks this space. If pricked, he bleeds. If scared, he runs. You must widen that space until it becomes an abyss. When reality demands speed, you apply the inertial brake. You receive catastrophic news and place it in your freezer. You forbid yourself from altering your breathing or moving your hands faster. By refusing to accelerate in response to pressure, you break the neck of the urgency dynamic. You force the situation to submit to your dictatorial tempo. Whoever controls the speed of the interaction controls the outcome. By systematically refusing to be rushed, you become an immovable force against which the panic of others crashes and disintegrates. Your immobility is a wall that absorbs the kinetic energy of the crisis, turning the fire into ice. Paramilitary slowness, aseptic and deliberate movement. Murdering haste does not mean falling into paralysis or negligence. It means transmuting chaotic movement into paramilitary slowness. Observe the difference between a terrified civilian in combat and an elite sniper. The civilian runs and screams, wasting massive caloric energy without escaping the line of fire. The sniper slows his breathing. He moves his muscles millimeter by millimeter. He adjusts the weapon with gelida precision, ignoring the chaos. His slowness is not weakness, it is the concentration of absolute lethality. In the administration of your empire, your actions must imitate this cadence. When you walk into a high-voltage meeting, you do so with heavy, measured steps. When you take the word, you articulate every syllable from the diaphragm without speeding up to avoid interruption. This aseptic slowness communicates that you possess unlimited time and no variable has the mass to disturb your center. Preservation of kinetic energy, the reservoir of inertia. In classical physics, energy exists in two states: potential, stored, and kinetic, in motion. Water in a dam possesses monumental potential energy, but it is completely still. When the gates open, that stillness transforms into kinetic energy capable of generating electricity for entire continents. Average humanity has constant leaks in its dam. They speak too fast, act on impulse, and get angry over trivialities. They are constantly spilling their potential energy into weak and useless kinetic energy. The thermodynamics of urgency demands you seal every crack in your psychological dam. You accumulate potential energy by retaining movement. You swallow unnecessary words. You stifle the impulse to react to offenses. You stop the compulsion to check the progress of your assets. You get colder on the outside, but your core accumulates incalculable atmospheric pressure. When you finally decide to act, you open the floodgate. But you do not do it with haste, you do it with the raw weight of a collapsing dam. The energy released is not a sweaty effort, it is a definitive inertial blow that alters the geography of your sector without the need for a second attempt. Cooling the ecosystem, the temperature of victory. Murdering haste has an invasive thermodynamic effect on your surroundings. Heat always seeks to transfer toward colder bodies to reach equilibrium. If you enter a negotiation maintaining the operative absolute zero, you become a thermal sink. You literally absorb the fire of others. Your 3D competitors will try to inject urgency. They will tell you offers expire and markets are volatile. They burn in the fire of their own anxiety. But by crashing against your paramilitary lethargy, their heat begins to dissipate. Urgency requires feedback. It requires the other side to also start running. As you remain motionless, heavy, and silent, their agitation finds no echo. Slowly, the panic of the room suffocates. The desperation of the competition freezes. The victory belongs to you because you were the only organism in the room with the discipline to let the others die of hypothermia. Repudiating sweaty effort, the fallacy of hard work. The culture of inferior biology has canonized hard work. The slave is indoctrinated to believe that the universe rewards physical sacrifice, sleepless nights, and ulcers. They teach you that power is proportional to the friction you endure. This is a deception to keep the turbines of slavery spinning. Physics does not reward pain. Physics obeys density and leverage. The creator in the crystal prison repudiates the merit of sweat. Excessive effort is the physical proof that your system is inefficient. If you have to push a wall until you bleed, you have not understood the architecture of the wall. Murdering haste means abandoning the cult of hard work to embrace dense work. Instead of 1,000 hurried actions, you spend 99% of your time in static observation and then execute one single millimetric action that collapses the structure. The empire is sustained by an architect who rarely rises. The maturation of the asset, the crystal in the dark. The final goal of annihilating urgency is to allow the physical miracle of crystallization. Diamonds are not forged on the surface, exposed to movement. They form in abyssal depths, in absolute darkness, under immemorial silence and crushed by incalculable geological pressure over time. Your assets and power must undergo this same maturation. The anxious entrepreneur digs up the seed every day to see if the root grew. The terrified investor sells impulsively. That agitation prevents the molecular cohesion of capital. When you lock your monopolies in the crystal prison, you stop the agitation. You bury the immaterial order and forget it through operative amnesia. By abandoning the haste for the result, you create a perfect thermodynamic container. The pressure of your unmovable certainty forces reality to organize into unbreakable structures. The empire hardens not by your hands, but by the cruelty of isolation. The dissolution of the mirror of urgency. In the ashboard, the egregor uses the mirror of urgency to reflect your own fears back to you. When you see others running, the mirror tells you that you are falling behind. This is a visual and acoustic lie. The speed of the biomass is not progress. It is the frantic vibration of an insect trapped in a spiderweb. By murdering haste, you shatter this mirror. You realize that there is nowhere to go because you are already the destination. The concept of late or early is a fiction of the clock. In the crystal prison, you exist in a state of post-haste. You have already won the race by refusing to stand at the starting line. This creates a void of meaning for the aggressor. When they try to race you and you don't even look at the track, they lose their sense of direction. Your stillness becomes a psychological torture for those who depend on speed to validate their existence. You win by being the only one who doesn't believe in the race. The weight of the iridium word. When you have murdered haste, your communication undergoes a mutation. You no longer feel the need to fill the silence. The slave speaks fast because he fears losing the listener's attention. He fears that if he stops making noise, his lack of mass will be revealed. The operator speaks with the weight of iridium. Each word you utter is a cold, heavy stone. You speak slowly, with a cadence that forces the listener to slow their own heart rate to keep up. You use silence as an active pressure. If you are asked a question that demands a hurried answer, you remain silent for 10 seconds, staring through the interlocutor. This silence is not passive. It is an offensive maneuver. It forces the other person to confront the noise in their own mind. By the time you speak, the interlocutor has already been defeated by the atmospheric pressure of your quietude. Your voice is not a suggestion. It is a decree that settles into the frozen air. The lethargy of the sovereign executioner. The final stage of the murder of haste is the adoption of the lethargy of the sovereign executioner. You do not rush the execution of a maneuver. You do not hurry the collapse of a competitor. You watch the process with the detached boredom of a god who knows that the outcome is already written in the BIOS. This lethargy is the highest form of power. It is the ability to watch your empire being built or your enemies being destroyed as if you were watching a silent film. You do not lean forward in your seat. You do not check the ticker every 5 minutes. You occupy the present with such density that the future is forced to arrive on your terms. If the simulation tries to delay your booty, you do not get angry. You simply increase your pressure. You become heavier. You realize that time is just a resistance that your gravity will eventually overcome. Your reign is not a sprint. It is the infinite, cold, and silent expansion of a black hole in a vacuum. Architect of the geological ice, look at yourself in the deep stillness of your own vacuum chamber, having suffocated the biological disease that consumes humanity. You managed to gut the physics of agitation. You understood that erratic movement and emotional friction were the heralds of entropy, burning your empire before its foundations could set. You mutilated haste, diagnosing it as the fire of incompetence. You turned off the biology of panic, forcing your organism to adopt the paramilitary lethargy of the supreme predator. You instated the veto on reactive acceleration, drowning the hysteria of others in the blackness of your gravitational well. You became the master of energy preservation, accumulating an atavistic inertia that you only release in the millisecond of absolute collapse. You repudiated the religion of sweaty effort, embracing the gelida efficiency of dense work. Finally, you buried your assets in the darkness of your own stasis. The urgency has been calcined. The fire of anxiety is extinguished. You operate in the physical world with a slowness that terrifies the living and subdues the markets. You are the architect of the geological ice. The second wall of your crystal prison is raised, freezing the space around you. You are the immovable monarch. Chapter 3. The paralysis of yesterday. Extirpating the entropy of memory. The physics of dead photons. The thermodynamic cost of remembrance. To govern the time variable and isolate your empire in perfect stasis, you must understand the physical nature of what inferior biology calls the past. In the cosmos mechanics, the past is not a geographical place to return to. It is not a room you can enter. The past is, in strictly optical terms, light that has already traveled. It is light that has traveled, impacted, and dissipated in the vastness of space. They are dead photons. The human mind, however, possesses a catastrophic evolutionary flaw: emotional memory. The mammalian brain has the capacity to spend astronomical amounts of metabolic and psychological energy trying to reconstruct the image of those photons. When you remember a painful event or a strategic error, your brain must ignite vast neural networks, consume oxygen, and generate heat to project that immaterial mirage into your consciousness. You are using the vital fuel of the present to illuminate an empty theater. We diagnose this energy leak as the entropy of memory. Every millisecond you spend inhabiting memory is a millisecond in which your inertial mass decreases in the present. You are transferring your gravity, weight, and density from the current coordinate toward a coordinate that no longer possesses material existence. The operator must understand that remembering with attachment is suicide. It is a thermodynamic suicide. It is the act of bleeding out your absolute power to try to revive an atomic corpse that will never breathe again. To erect the crystal prison, you must seal the leak of the past and concentrate every erg of energy into the now. You must become an entity without history to become an entity without limits. The black hole of nostalgia, the anesthesia of the weak. The most seductive and destructive manifestation of memory is nostalgia. 3D society glorifies nostalgia. The biomass gathers to talk about the old days, sighing for golden eras or the purity they believed they possessed. Apply the scalpel of physics to this feeling. Nostalgia is the anesthesia of organisms defeated by the now. When an individual lacks the hyperdensity to dominate their current environment, their mind seeks refuge in the warmth of a distorted memory. Nostalgia is a thermal evasion mechanism. It warms you artificially with the illusion of extinct happiness so you do not feel the gelida cold of your current incompetence. But this is poison. Nostalgia acts as a backward-facing black hole. It sucks your will for conquest. It convinces you that the best of your existence has already happened. A creator who feels nostalgia is a monarch who has abdicated his throne to sit and cry in front of the ruins of his old palace. In the architecture of total immobility, it is forbidden. You forbid yourself from looking in the rearview mirror of existence. You assume that any event left behind your timeline is inorganic dross that no longer deserves a single calorie of your attention. You look ahead, not because you seek a destination, but because you refuse to let your mass be diluted by the ghosts of what was. The friction of regret, fighting against causality. If nostalgia is the poison of past victories, regret is the sulfuric acid of defeats. The slave goes to bed, and his mind becomes a torture chamber. They go over their mistakes, feeling atrocious guilt and a desperate desire to go back. Analyze regret from the second law of thermodynamics. Entropy always increases. A broken glass cannot recompose itself. Physical time has a unidirectional arrow. Regret is the psychological attempt to reverse the arrow of time. It is the attempt to swim against the waterfall of universal causality. This effort is the most violent generator of friction in the human psyche. It calcines your sanity. Fighting against what already happened generates an emotional temperature capable of melting your focus. Regret keeps you tied to the moment of impact, forcing you to live the accident in an infinite loop. The operator executes the eradication of guilt. You do not regret tactical errors because morality is a human invention. The error was simply a suboptimal mathematical calculation in the field of probabilities. Gravity does not apologize when it crushes an organism. It simply continues to be gravity. You apply this same geological coldness to your failures. The fact has crystallized. Regret is burning energy protesting the hardness of a diamond. Tactical autopsy extracting the useful isotope. Eliminating regret does not mean the operator should commit the same error twice. There is an abyss between suffering for the past and learning from the mechanics of collision. When a maneuver results in a loss of capital, the biomass enters mourning. The hyperdense creator executes a tactical autopsy instead. The process must be surgical, sterile, and devoid of any fluctuation in your basal temperature. You place the corpse of the error on the steel table of your mind. There are no tears. You take the scalpel of pure analysis and dissect the event. You look for the structural flaw. You look for the mathematical failure. You extract the hard data, the math of the failure. That data is a high-value strategic radioactive isotope. Once you have it, you order the immediate incineration of the rest of the corpse. You burn the emotional context. You burn the faces of those who betrayed you. You burn the bitter taste of the loss. It ceases to exist. You only keep the mathematical formula of the lesson to incorporate it into your inertial armor. This is the only way the past is allowed to enter the crystal prison, not as a memory that hurts, but as an assimilated physical principle. You feed on the data of your own destruction to become an indestructible force in the present. The corpse of glory, the dead weight of trophies. The danger of memory does not reside only in failures. Past victories are double-edged swords that threaten to melt the walls of your empire. The human collects trophies. They want to remember how great they were. This accumulation of past glory becomes an identity, and here lies the thermal trap. Trophies generate complacency. Past success injects a comforting heat into your core, convincing you that you can reduce the pressure and enjoy the fruits of your effort. Complacency is the prelude to disintegration. In the millisecond, the ice feels satisfied being cold, it begins to melt. The lethal operator buries the glory and destroys the pedestals. You forbid yourself from consuming your own biographical success. If you conquered a market yesterday, that victory belongs to yesterday. Today, you force yourself to assume a tactical amnesia. You are an organism with 0 victories in its immediate file, with an inertial hunger that demands to be satiated once again. A static empire is not maintained by living off the interest of rusted glories. It is maintained by applying the same atrocious force of gravity in the current millisecond. You ignore that any previous victory ever existed. You wake up every morning as a predator with an empty belly and a cold heart, ready to collapse reality again. The annihilation of biography, murdering the narrative. The human being narrates his own existence. They build a novel where they are the tragic protagonist who overcame themselves. This biographical narrative is a heavy chain they drag through space-time. When you cling to your story, you force yourself to act in coherence with that character. You limit your potential. If your narrative is that of the tireless fighter, your brain will unconsciously seek friction and difficulty to maintain the character's coherence. To operate at absolute zero, you must execute the annihilation of biography. You are not your past. You are not your trauma or your financial failures. You are a physical force. Break the narrative thread. By stripping yourself of your biography, you become inscrutable and free. You have no historical image to protect. You have no debts to the version of yourself that existed 10 years ago. You are an immaculate physical force, without a past, without existential fingerprints. You are a silent void. The annihilation of personal history allows you to mutate, change direction, and exercise a financial or territorial violence that the biomass cannot predict. They try to read you using a book whose pages you yourself burned. You become an enigma to the simulation, a localized singularity that obeys no prior law or story. The repudiation of karmic debt, the universe has no accounting. The deepest psychological conditioning linked to the past is the morality of debt. Systems of control have instilled the concept of karma, or compensation. They teach you that if you cause damage, the universe will charge you. This belief forces humanity to carry a sack of invisible stones. Guilt weakens them. Guilt weakens their electromagnetic field, inviting punishment. Subject karma to pure quantum physics. The material universe has no morality. Gravity does not distinguish between saints and sinners. It crushes both with the same equation. Karma is an invention of herds to console themselves when wolves devour them. The monarch repudiates karmic debt. You assume the absolute amorality of physical laws. If in your ascent you had to expropriate or crush obstacles, you do not keep a single drop of remorse. You refuse to pay a cosmic tax that does not exist. By convincing yourself that the universe owes you nothing, you close the thermal leak. You operate with a terrifying inertial cleanliness, knowing that the only real punishment in existence is lacking enough mass to impose your will. You do not look at the sky for forgiveness. You look at the board for expansion. The absence of guilt makes your gravity pure and your impact absolute. You are beyond their human judgment. The amnesic void as shielding, immunity to blackmail. When you interact with the social and corporate ecosystem, your adversaries will try to use your past as a weapon. They will try to unearth your mistakes from 5 years ago to shame you and make your temperature rise. If you have executed the amputation of yesterday, this attack crashes against a wall of soundless steel. You adopt the amnesic void. When the world screams remembering your previous sins, you look at them with the aseptic perplexity of someone hearing about a stranger who died decades ago. You do not defend yourself from the past because the you of the past no longer inhabits this container. You are a new entity. You do not apologize for actions occurred in time coordinates you no longer occupy. This categorical refusal to recognize historical blackmail unhinges the adversary. The enemy meets a wall of clinical indifference. They discover they cannot hurt you by shooting arrows at a shadow that has already dissolved. You are bulletproof. The amnesic void turns you into a bulletproof entity because there is no contact surface where the dart of humiliation can strike. By having no history, you have no handles. The matrix cannot grasp you. You move through the simulation as a spectral force, present in mass but absent in biography. You are the invisible master, the absolute center of the now, the singularity without memory. The extirpation of memory is not meant to leave you in a vegetative state. The purpose is the massive accumulation of energy for the singular event. Imagine a laser. Ordinary light is scattered, like a mind trapped in past and future. A laser collimates all photons into a single coherent beam synchronized in space and time. That beam, by concentrating all its energy on a single geometric point, is capable of cutting titanium. When you amputate nostalgia and burn your trophies, you are collimating your consciousness. All the immense mental voltage you use to sustain your personal history is redirected abruptly toward the present millisecond. You reach the absolute center of the now. In this coordinate of singularity, your perception becomes microscopic and lethal. The density of your attention is so overwhelming that matter has no option but to surrender. You no longer solve problems by negotiating. You pierce through them. You dictate results based on your current weight. The crystal prison becomes impenetrable because there are no temporal cracks where weakness can infiltrate. You are a point of infinite pressure in the simulator. By being nowhere but here and now, you become the axis upon which the reality of others must spin. You are the sovereign of the instantaneous. Your rule is immediate. The monarch without shadow. Look at yourself in the majestic stillness of your own vault of immobility, having forever closed the door to the ghosts that drained humanity's voltage. You managed to suffocate the physics of dead photons. You understood that remembering with attachment was a thermodynamic leak, a waste of energy to illuminate dead scenarios. You mutilated the seduction of nostalgia. You executed the murder of regret, assuming the universe is a one-way river. You applied the tactical autopsy to your defeats, extracting the math and burning the emotion. You repudiated the corpse of glory, destroying your pedestals to ensure yesterday's success never melts today's ice. You annihilated your biographical narrative, freeing yourself from the chains of coherence to mutate with the lethal efficiency of a force of nature. You rejected the karmic tax, embracing the amorality of physical laws to operate with aseptic cleanliness. You turned your memory into a defensive black hole, an amnesic void. The umbilical cord with time has been cut. You are no longer the sum of your experiences. You are the totality of the mass concentrated in this single cosmic heartbeat. You are the monarch without shadow. The third wall of your immovable empire has been raised. You are ready to stop chasing matter through the hours. Stay cold. Chapter 4. The Block Universe, the coordinate of the immovable empire. Biological myopia, the dissection of Minkowski space. For the crystal prison to acquire its absolute hardness and seal your ecosystem against time anxiety, you must subject your understanding of the cosmos to the most violent eradication in human history. You must murder the illusion that the future is a dark vacuum that has not yet been written. Subject reality to the physics of the space-time continuum. In theoretical physics and general relativity, there exists the mathematical model of Minkowski space, a four-dimensional structure where the three spatial dimensions, length, width, depth, fuse indivisibly with the dimension of time. This is an unbreakable law. The astrophysical conclusion of this model is what science calls the block universe, or eternalism. Under this law, the universe is not a film being recorded in real time. It is an immense block of titanium crystal, static and perfectly finished. Everything that has existed and the present millisecond already coexist simultaneously. The perception that time flows or that the future does not yet exist is purely and exclusively biological myopia. The mammalian brain, a primitive processor designed to flee predators, lacks the bandwidth to perceive the totality of the four-dimensional block. To avoid sensory collapse, biology forces you to see it in slices. The slave walks inside the dark crystal with a tiny flashlight, believing reality only exists where his light, the present, is focusing, terrified that the next step leads to a vacuum. The lethal operator turns on the lights of the entire geological structure, revealing that the future is already fossilized. It is an immovable fact. Abandoning creation, the myth of the anxious builder. When the intellect assimilates the physics of the block universe, the paradigm of entrepreneurship, conquest, and power suffers a cataclysmic collapse. 3D society indoctrinates the biomass in the religion of creation. They tell you to sweat, suffer, and bleed to build your future as if it were a fragile house of cards. They convince you that success is a building you must raise brick by brick, and if you stop, it will remain unfinished. The lethal operator diagnoses creation as the friction of thermal idiots. If the block universe is a static mathematical reality, then the empire you wish to rule is not a fantasy to be manufactured. It is a geometric coordinate that already exists. At some specific latitude and longitude of the space-time continuum, x, y, z, t, your empire is already perfectly crystallized, functioning with zero friction, bathed in the ice of your unquestionable authority. It is already done. It is already consolidated as an unalterable reality. Understanding this uproots the anxiety of constructive effort. You are not a laborer carrying bricks toward an uncertain future. You are an inertial navigator moving through a static map toward a coordinate of hyperdensity that already belongs to you by cosmological right. The job is not to build. The job is to intercept. The murder of hope, the weakness of the one who desires. To navigate the static block and align your mass with the empire's coordinate, you must purge the most poisonous and toxic feeling of humanity: hope. Deep psychology and pure metaphysics establish that hope is the thermal manifestation of lack. The slave says, "I hope to achieve this goal." He is admitting a lack. By thinking the word hope, the organism empirically confesses it contemplates the possibility of failure. If you contemplate failure, you are injecting doubt into your electromagnetic field. Doubt generates molecular friction, and that friction diverts your trajectory within the space-time block. It is a fatal leakage. Hope is a beggar pleading at the door of the universe. In the crystal prison architecture, hope is outlawed and replaced by inertial certainty. A geologist does not hope the granite mountain stays there tomorrow. He has the inertial certainty of its existence based on matter's density. He does not waste energy on doubt. The hyperdense creator does not harbor hopes about success. Why would you hope for something if you know through the physics of eternalism that it already exists as a solid object in the four-dimensional lattice? Hope is the emotional reaction to uncertainty. Inertial certainty is the psychopathic lethargy of the map holder. The mechanics of interception, tuning the gravitational mass. If the empire already exists in the block universe, the ballistic question is, how does one travel from the current coordinate of scarcity to the coordinate of absolute power without using the friction of anxiety? The answer resides in the thermodynamics of frequencies and the tuning of gravitational mass. It is a matter of resonance. In quantum mechanics, matter's states are determined by vibration and density. Your current coordinate has a specific density. The coordinate of your immovable empire has an astronomically higher density. If you try to move toward that coordinate, while maintaining the psychology of scarcity, low density. Space-time repels you. To intercept your empire, you must imitate its thermodynamic state in the present millisecond. Visualize yourself in that future coordinate, a monarch who has subdued his ecosystem, possessing infinite capital and operating with the coldness of absolute zero. That monarch feels no anxiety or haste. He does not beg. The mechanics of interception demand you embody that paramilitary lethargy today. If you act with a slave's urgency, you are moving away from the coordinate. If you anchor yourself in absolute rest and aseptic indifference, your density matches the crystallized empire's density. Tuning both masses makes gravitational attraction inevitable. Thermodynamics of passive attraction, the zero-friction magnet. The physical 3D ecosystem is inherently resistant to change. When the biomass tries to alter reality using brute effort, stress, and heated negotiations, they generate a hot shockwave. The physical universe detects that heat as an aggression and responds with friction. Obstacles, betrayals, and legal delays appear. The crystal prison neutralizes this resistance through the thermodynamics of passive attraction. By understanding that the future is already printed in the static block, you abandon the need to push reality. You assume the lethargy of a planetary-sized iridium magnet. You are the attractor, not the seeker. A magnet does not strive to attract iron filings. It does not sweat. It does not generate convective heat. It simply exists in its maximum expression of a magnetic field, and matter is forced to submit to its lines of force. The operator who has eradicated doubt and hope becomes this zero-friction field. Your decisions of market absorption or territorial dominance are executed as soundless mathematical sentences. Since you emit no radiation of desire, the universe finds no hot surface against which to exert friction. Adversaries surrender their territories without understanding why. You drag the coordinate through gravity. Structural detachment. You are not the empire, you are the observer. A critical flaw that melts power architects is the fusion of identities. The inferior human builds a company or a fortune and fuses his biological ego with those objects. If the company suffers a setback, his psyche bleeds. In the contemplation of the block universe, this fusion is a metaphysical aberration. You must execute structural detachment. The empire, the capital, and the submission are geological formations within the space-time crystal. They are matter. You, at your purest core, are not the matter. You are the iridium eye, the hyperdense consciousness moving and illuminating the different slices of the block. You are not the empire, you are the observer who has decided to occupy the coordinate of the empire. This clinical dissociation is the supreme armor of your inertial health. When you look at your 9-figure bank account, you feel no inflatable pride. When you dominate a sector, you don't let dopamine heat your reactor. You observe it with the same utilitarian apathy an astronaut uses for his control panel. It is the equipment needed to govern the vacuum, but it is not his identity. By not loving the structure you have intercepted, you become geometrically invulnerable to its loss, guaranteeing that no market fluctuation alters your base. The annihilation of uncertainty, walking on conquered ground. How does an operator, who has assimilated the physics of eternalism, move through his own existence? With the soundless petulance of one walking through the ruins of a city he has already conquered. The biomass lives immersed in uncertainty. Business meetings and economic fluctuations produce tachycardia in them. They genuinely believe the result is in the air. The monarch inside the crystal prison has murdered uncertainty. When you enter a boardroom where your corporation's fate is debated, you do not debate. You do not fight to secure an uncertain future. You sit at the head of the table knowing the film's ending. You know your victory is already solidified in the 3D block. Your body language and your geological silence transmit the overwhelming certainty that the current conflict is a mere bureaucratic procedure the universe is processing. You have already ordered the coordinate. The world is simply catching up to your weight. The enemy catches this subconscious signal. Before them is not a rival trying to win. There is a lethargic entity observing them with the boredom of one who knows they are operatively dead. The absolute certainty that the future is immovable destroys the will to fight of any living organism. They surrender to the inevitable. The obstacle autopsy, the linear mirage of failure. The reptile in your brain will try to rebel when the material universe presents what inferior biology calls an obstacle. If a hostile takeover is blocked or a partner betrays the ecosystem, the weak mind will scream, "The coordinate is lost." Subject: the obstacle to the quantum autopsy of the static block. In a four-dimensional map, a straight line is not always the path of least thermal resistance. A financial setback is not the end of the empire or the annulment of the coordinate. It is simply a topographical fold inside the crystal. It is a crater you must cross to continue the interception of the goal. The human biomass confuses the bump in the road with the final destination. That is why they get depressed and dissipate their mass. The hyperdense creator understands the obstacle is an intermediate coordinate of lower density. Faced with a catastrophic reversal, you apply psychological ice. You do not force reality. You accept the new topographical configuration in a millisecond without shedding a calorie of regret. You inspect the damage with the apathy of a machine recalculating a GPS route, knowing absolutely that the final destination coordinate, the immovable empire, has not vanished. It only requires a slightly different angle. The osmium throne in the eye of the hurricane. Macroscopic immobility. The ultimate manifestation of the block universe architecture in your psyche is the consolidation of the osmium throne. It is the state of macroscopic immobility. While you rise in the hierarchies of power, the storms will become more violent. Corporate purges and social hostility will form thermal hurricanes. The parasitic matrix is designed to shake living organisms until they bleed. The crystal prison is the soundless eye of that hurricane. By understanding that future and past are integral parts of the same cosmic object you inhabit, external chaos loses its threat. You stop at the center of your own gravity. Corporations burn outside, competitors run desperately, and society screams about a new apocalypse every quarter. You observe them from the seat of eternal consciousness. You do not emit panic mandates. You do not restructure finances out of fear. You allow no hyperdensity to be expropriated by the thermal storm. Your immobility in the face of chaos is the most devastating act of geometric arrogance. You communicate to the matrix's hurricanes that you are an anomaly too heavy to be lifted by their winds, too cold to be melted by their fear, and too anchored in reality's deep structure to be moved even 1 millimeter. Architect of the cosmic fossil, look at yourself in your own stasis, having decapitated the biological illusion of flow. You managed to suffocate the myopia of linear perception. You understood the universe is not a treadmill, but Minkowski space, a static block where the empire you wish to rule is already perfectly fossilized. It is yours. You mutilated the anxious effort of the builder, abandoning the sweat of creation to embrace the cold physics of coordinate interception. You executed the murder of hope, replacing that thermal weakness with the inertial certainty of the map holder. You tuned your mass through aseptic lethargy to attract the goal. You established structural detachment, refusing to fuse your consciousness with the inorganic matter of success, guaranteeing zero friction. You annihilated the ecosystem's uncertainty, walking through corporate boardrooms with the dull boredom of one who walks through territory that already belongs to him. You subjected linear failure to quantum autopsy, assuming obstacles are simple topographical variations on your route toward the absolute coordinate. And you sat on the osmium throne in the eye of the thermal hurricane, showing the world's chaos that macroscopic immobility is the shield against material hysteria. Chapter 5. Psychological Stasis, the Vacuum of Expectation. The Neurobiology of Lack, the Dopamine Fraud. To erect the unshakable walls of the crystal prison, you must execute a surgical intervention on the chemical engine that drives the inferior biomass. The entire humanity is a slave to one neurotransmitter, dopamine. Popular science has wrongly classified dopamine as the pleasure molecule. Deep neurobiology proves the opposite. Dopamine is the molecule of anticipation. It is released not when you obtain the reward, but when you expect to obtain it. It is the fuel of lack. When a human sets a goal, their brain floods them with dopamine to force them to move toward the future. This chemical generates a feverish excitement, a metabolic heat that calcines the present. Expectation creates, by geometric definition, an abyss between the coordinate you occupy, where you lack the object, and the future coordinate, where you expect to have it. That abyss is the thermodynamic hell of humanity. Human suffering is not born from physical pain. It is born exclusively from the friction between expectations and reality. If you expect the market to reward you and the market collapses, the gap between your hot expectation and the cold reality generates a psychological shockwave that fractures your inertial mass. The lethal operator diagnoses expectation as an unacceptable voltage leak. To govern, you must apply a tourniquet to this circuit. You must transmute into an organism operating in a state of psychological stasis, a condition of absolute emotional immobility where biological desire is replaced by the mechanical, aseptic, and gelida execution of the mandate. You stop being a seeker and become an immovable destination point for the matter that surrounds you. The friction of waiting, the wear of the fixed gaze. In collision mechanics, if you emit a force and stay watching the result with muscular and emotional tension, you are generating convective friction. You are blowing on the embers of your own stress. The average entrepreneur makes a high-impact decision and immediately sits down to wait. They monitor charts. They watch the clock. They consume their metabolic energy, searching for signs that their expectation will be met. The metaphysics of manifestation repudiates this attitude. Anxious attention acts as thermal resistance. In quantum physics, the quantum Zeno effect proves that constant observation of an unstable system can freeze its evolution and progress. When you watch your own order with the anxiety of one who doubts, you prevent the mathematical probability from collapsing in your favor. Your fear that it won't happen keeps matter in a state of suspension. Psychological stasis demands the murder of the fixed gaze. You emit the order and execute the move with zero friction violence. In the exact millisecond the order leaves your core, you execute the amputation of interest. You withdraw your attention. You turn around. You submerge yourself again in the static center of the now. By emptying yourself of expectation and refusing to monitor the result, you snatch the friction of your doubt away from the universe. The guillotine of desire. The monarch does not yearn. Desire is the antithesis of gravity. Desiring something is the empirical confession that it is outside your control perimeter. The beggar desires. The prey desires. The hyperdense creator, stabilized at 0 degrees Kelvin inside his crystal prison, does not desire. He dictates. Desire is hot and rising. It seeks to reach the atmosphere. The mandate is cold and descending. It crushes the Earth's crust with its geological weight. To reach the vacuum of expectation, you must subject all your biological impulses of ambition to the obsidian guillotine. You do not desire that your empire expands. You observe how expansion is the ineludible mathematical consequence. You do not yearn to crush your competition. You execute their disintegration as a procedure of territorial hygiene. By extirpating desire, you eliminate attachment to the result. And when the result no longer matters emotionally, you acquire supreme invulnerability. Material reality cannot extort an organism that is indifferent to it. The vacuum of your desire becomes a black hole that physical matter feels compelled to fill. You become a void so deep and heavy that the simulation is forced to organize itself around your lack of need. By wanting nothing, you make it impossible for the matrix to withhold anything from you. You govern through pure structural absence. Operative lethargy, action without excitement. The biomass confuses apathy with paralysis. They believe that if there is no emotion, there is no action. The slave needs motivational speeches or the terror of poverty to move the world's pulleys. His action depends on the inflammation of his nervous system. Psychological stasis does not stop you. It purifies your movement. It introduces the concept of operative lethargy. In this state, you are capable of executing maneuvers of corporate destruction or colossal financial mergers submerged in absolute boredom. Your hands move the threads of the universe, but your nervous system stays in the same lethargic frequency as if you were staring at a blank wall. Execution without excitement is terrifying to the environment. When your adversaries face you, they expect to see the shine of ambition in your eyes. By hitting your operative lethargy, their minds collapse. They cannot understand how a force of such destructive magnitude can operate without emitting heat or showing a single pulse. Castration of triumph and failure. Data, not emotions. Expectation is a pendulum swinging between two poisonous poles, the euphoria of triumph and the agony of failure. If you allow expectation to survive, you will be condemned to swing on this pendulum, dizzy from ego thermodynamics. To seal the crystal prison, you must castrate both poles. You must turn events into simple figures. When material reality obeys your mandate and the empire absorbs wealth, the biological ego will try to inflate. It will try to secrete dopamine and scream victory. You must repress this impulse with the coldness of an ice block. To celebrate is to confess that triumph surprised you, revealing that deep down you harbored a doubt. The monarch receives success with an abyssal indifference. It is simply the logical arrangement of matter before an inertial superiority. Similarly, if matter presents resistance and a project collapses, the ego will try to scream failure. You must anesthetize that pain. Failure is not an offense. It is a simple packet of data. By reducing monumental triumph and apocalyptic disaster to the category of simple informative data, you strip the universe of its ability to alter your temperature. The vacuum of expectation shields you against the blackmail of victory and the extortion of defeat. Only stasis exists, pure and unshakable, above all human outcomes. Isolation from external dopamine, closing the social hatch. The human ecosystem is a gigantic resonance chamber of crossed expectations. The biomass demands you meet its expectations and offers social approval if you do. They applaud you and give you titles. This is the thermal domestication system of the masses. If your crystal prison is to be unassailable, you must become deaf. The operator executes the isolation from external dopamine. You disconnect emotionally from the judgment of allies, subordinates, and society. If they praise your financial brilliance, you receive the compliment as one receives a weather report. If they insult or defame you, you receive it with the same level of interest. By refusing to feed on external validation, you cut the leash with which the herd controls individuals. Your immaterial core becomes self-sufficient. Since you do not expect to be loved or understood, their love and hate bounce off your obsidian perimeter without causing the slightest vibration in your psychological stasis. The tyranny of inner silence, the cessation of internal dialogue. Expectation is often a feverish dialogue occurring inside one's own skull. The slave talks to himself constantly, debating options and imagining future scenarios. This monologue is the convective friction of the brain spinning in a vacuum. Psychological stasis requires the tyranny of inner silence. You must end the noise. You cannot govern the universe's stillness if your own mind is a war zone. You must instate martial censorship over internal dialogue. You turn off the narrator's voice. When you take a decision, you do not debate it with yourself. When at rest, you do not allow imagination to generate holograms of possible futures to heat you. Forcing this inner silence is unnatural for the mammal, but it is the base frequency of the quantum deity. In the soundless vacuum of a mind that has stopped talking to itself, concentration density reaches critical mass. Solutions to complex problems emerge from the silent pressure of operative absolute zero, not from effort. The state of inevitability, substituting physics for faith. The weak human operates under the banner of faith. They blindly believe in a result because they lack the power to guarantee it. Faith is the first cousin of hope. It is warm, emotional, and extremely fragile before the rigor of entropy. Inside the crystal prison, faith is eradicated and replaced by the state of inevitability. Inevitability is not an emotion. It is an inertial and deaf conviction. It is the cellular understanding that your hyperdensity is superior to the environment's resistance and that by physics laws, the environment must yield. When you occupy the vacuum of expectation, you do not believe you will conquer the market. You assume conquest with the same bored lethargy with which you assume an object will fall if you release it. This psychopathic certainty eliminates the need for motivation. Positive thinking is the life jacket of the drowning. The unalterable monarch does not think positively. He does not think at all. He merely exerts his weight. The creator's structural vacuum. Look at yourself in the gelida immensity of your own mind, having extirpated the tumor of anticipation that devoured the peace of men. You managed to suffocate the neurobiology of lack. You understood that dopamine was the chemical whip used by biology to keep you running, and you applied the paramilitary tourniquet. You mutilated the friction of waiting, murdering the anxious gaze that froze quantum probability. You executed the guillotine of desire, assuming the monarch does not yearn but dictates. You submerged yourself in operative lethargy, executing maneuvers of mass destruction with the aseptic boredom of a geological automaton. You castrated the pendulum of triumph and failure, reducing apocalypse and glory to simple data packets unable to alter your temperature. You executed the isolation from external dopamine, becoming deaf to the biomass's applause or hate. You instated the tyranny of inner silence, operating from the soundless density of the void, and you transmuted the fragile faith of mortals into the state of inevitability, assuming success as the boring physical law of your own crushing mass. Expectation's pain is pulverized. You are the creator's structural vacuum. By emptying yourself of need, you have become the most lethal magnetic force on the ashboard. Chapter 6. Inertial crystallization, the repose of matter. The thermodynamics of phase transition, the repudiation of the liquid. For the empire forged in the crystal prison to acquire the geometric invulnerability of iridium, the operator must understand the physics of the states of matter. Human biomass suffers from a pathological obsession with liquidity. In the financial, corporate, and relational world, the slave loves to keep his assets in a liquid or gaseous state. They want to have money available instantly. They want open options. They want the capacity to change direction in any millisecond. They believe that fluidity is security. Apply the laws of thermodynamics to this fallacy. Matter in a liquid or gaseous state is characterized by possessing high kinetic energy. Its molecular bonds are weak, unstable, and chaotic. A liquid takes the shape of the container that holds it. If the three-dimensional ecosystem tilts, the liquid spills and is lost. A gas expands until it dissipates into nothingness. Maintaining your power, your capital, and your decisions in a fluid state means subjecting them to constant thermal agitation. You are vulnerable to evaporation and theft. The hyper-dense creator repudiates liquidity as a final state. The goal of true material domination is the phase transition toward the solid state, specifically toward the perfect crystalline lattice. The hardest, most valuable, and unshakable materials in the three-dimensional universe, such as diamond or osmium, possess rigid atomic bonds and a kinetic energy near zero. Their power does not reside in their capacity to move or adapt to the vessel, but in their absolute refusal to deform in the face of external pressure. Inertial crystallization is the process through which you take the fluid matter of your conquests, and, through the application of absolute repose and incalculable psychological pressure, you harden it into a monolith. The thermal surveillance syndrome, the market's Zeno effect. The greatest obstacle to the crystallization of matter is the human's own gaze. The psychology of the terrified individual forces him to constantly monitor his assets. The entrepreneur checks his sales metrics every hour. The hypnotized investor looks at the fluctuation of financial charts. The insecure individual audits his relationships, looking for signs of abandonment. This surveillance is not harmless. It is a devastating thermodynamic intervention. In quantum mechanics, there is a proven phenomenon called the quantum Zeno effect. The constant and repeated observation of an unstable system inhibits its temporal evolution. The system freezes in its state of agitation because the measurement continuously disturbs it. At a metaphysical and psychological level, when you watch your assets with shallow breath and an amygdala inflamed by the fear of loss, you are injecting human heat into the system. That heat, that friction born of doubt and expectation, prevents the atoms of capital, power, or corporate structures from settling down. The thermal vibration of your anxiety keeps the molecular bonds of your empire in a liquid state. You are boiling the water, preventing it from freezing. For matter to crystallize, the temperature must drop, and the only way to lower the temperature of a project or an investment is to execute the tactical murder of surveillance. Geological oblivion, operative amnesia as a pressure chamber. Natural crystallography teaches us that diamonds do not form on the Earth's surface, exposed to sunlight and rapid climatic alterations. They form in the abyssal depths of the Earth's mantle, plunged into inscrutable darkness under the weight of entire continents and throughout geological eras where silence is absolute. Your assets and your strategies must submit to this same pressure chamber. The psychological tool to achieve this environment is geological oblivion. Once you have made a high-density decision, you must bury that mandate. You entomb it in the depth of your consciousness and exercise a voluntary and psychopathic amnesia over it. You disconnect from the immediate result. By tactically forgetting the existence of that order, you withdraw the light of your own mental friction. You submerge it in the cold darkness of the crystal prison. In that darkness, free from the fluctuation of your moods, quantum probability collapses stably. The pressure of your underlying certainty compresses reality. The pressure forces the atoms of 3D reality to align in a perfect and lethal lattice. The empire matures because the architect had the geometric arrogance to leave it alone. You do not worry about the result because you have already commanded it in the bios of the universe. Your silence is the weight that turns carbon into diamond. The veto on premature intervention, the murder of micromanagement. The biological ego feeds on the sensation of control. The weak human needs to feel that his sweaty hands are molding the clay every day, because if they do not touch the work, they feel they are not valuable. This pathology manifests in the business world as micromanagement. Micromanagement is the sworn enemy of inertial crystallization. It is the friction of the thermal idiot who digs up the seed every morning to see if it has already germinated, killing the root by exposing it to the atmosphere. The lethal operator instates the veto on premature intervention. You understand that constant intervention is a lack of respect for the physics of inertia. If you have built a corporate structure, and in 3 days you intervene to correct or adjust based on short-term panic, you are fracturing the crystal in full formation. You are introducing impurities into the atomic lattice. True authority resides in the capacity to issue an order and endure absolute paralysis, while reality twists to fulfill it. You do not move a single finger to facilitate the work of the ecosystem. You let the matter suffer, the pieces grind, and the system adapt under the tyranny of your immobility. Premature intervention is the abortion of greatness. The pure creator assists the birth of success with his hands crossed behind his back, trusting the pressure. The atomic lattice architecture, order at 0 degrees Kelvin. We must delve deeper into the morphology of the crystal. Why does the diamond cut common glass? Because of its atomic lattice. In a weak material, atoms are arranged randomly, leaving gaps and planes of structural weakness. When they receive an impact, those planes slide and the material breaks. In a high-density crystal, each atom is linked. Each atom is linked geometrically with its neighbors in a perfect three-dimensional matrix, where there is no room for deformation. In the architecture of your empire, this atomic lattice is built through inner and outer silence. Every decision you make in a state of panic, every concession you make to please the tribe is a defect in your lattice. They are misaligned atoms. When the crisis hits, your empire will break through those lines of weakness. On the contrary, when you consolidate operative absolute zero, each order you issue lacks the vibration of fear. They are solid blocks. By maintaining stasis and allowing time to pass without altering your directive, these decisions amalgamate. The lack of thermal fluctuation allows the corporate structure, capital, and psychological discipline to form an unbreakable lattice. Your empire becomes hyper-dense. When the market tries to hit you, the kinetic energy of the attack finds no planes of weakness. It simply bounces off, shattering the aggressor's tool against your geometric purity. Shielding against volatility, the acoustics of the vacuum. The economic and social ecosystem is inherently volatile. It is designed by entropy to rise, fall, explode, and collapse in spasmodic cycles. Journalists, analysts, and competitors are gigantic speakers that emit crisis sound waves to induce vibration in the masses. They want you to enter into resonance with their terror. Inertial crystallization requires total acoustic isolation. It requires the acoustics of the vacuum. The physics of sound dictates that acoustic waves need a material medium, air, water, metal, to propagate. Sound cannot travel through the space vacuum. In the same way, the hysteria of the 3D world needs a permeable mind. It needs a mind loaded with emotions and human attachments to be able to infect the psyche. By taking refuge in the crystal prison and emptying yourself of expectation, hope, and fear, you become an acoustic vacuum. The markets can plunge, currencies can devalue, and the biomass can scream that the end is near. Those panic waves hit the limit of your inertial gravity and are silenced instantly. Not possessing the atmosphere of the biological ego, there is no medium for the propagation of terror in your core. You stay indifferent to volatility. While humanity melts its heritage due to stress, you remain frozen in your position, observing with lethargy. The tyranny of repose, the passive work of gravity. There is a supreme arrogance in the act of doing absolutely nothing when the entire universe demands movement from you. It is the tyranny of repose. Biology associates repose with laziness, with a lack of productivity. This is a view typical of draft animals that measure their value by the amount of load they can drag through the mud. In the physics of collapse, repose is the highest and most destructive form of passive work. Consider a supermassive black hole at the center of a galaxy. It does not move frantically looking for stars to consume. It remains in an inscrutable repose. Its work consists exclusively of being infinitely heavy. It is precisely that lethargic repose, that refusal to move, that forces matter hundreds of thousands of light-years away to organize its orbit around it. When you acquire the psychological mass of the unbribable creator, your inaction becomes tyrannical. You do not call to confirm a deal. You do not justify yourself before critics. Your immobility exerts a monstrous gravitational suction. You force the social and financial ecosystem to make all the kinetic effort, all the caloric expenditure, to approach your position. Matter wears itself out, trying to interact with your stasis. Your repose is a weapon of domination that suffocates the will of the living. The collapse of fluid competition, crashing against the monolith. The direct consequence of reaching the state of inertial crystallization in a world dominated by liquid organisms is victory through asymmetric attrition. Your adversaries on the corporate or financial chessboard are fluid entities. They adapt, they change shape, they flee from difficult conflicts, and they seek the path of least resistance. They boast of their flexibility and resilience, subject their flexibility to the thermodynamics of collision. When a high-pressure current of water hits a wall of porous rock, it manages to erode it. But when that same current hits a plate of pure iridium, cooled to absolute zero, the water erodes nothing. The energy of the impact makes the fluid explode into millions of atomized drops, destroying the cohesion of the liquid without leaving a single scratch on the wall. Your adversaries will try to attack you with price wars or smear campaigns. Their attack is the jet of water. They expect your psyche to deform and your anxiety to make you yield. But you have eradicated the porosity of biological empathy. You are a monolith. You absorb the impact without retreating a millimeter, maintaining a dead-eye contact that pierces the threat. The competition, hitting this inorganic invulnerability, loses all structural cohesion. They abandon the attack terrified of a geography that does not bleed. The myth of linear progression, the silence of apparent stagnation. The slave is indoctrinated to expect constant gratification. They observe growth charts and demand that the line goes up every day. If progress stops, they panic, assuming the project is dying. This is a fundamental ignorance of how quantum leaps and phase transitions operate in real matter. When water boils, its temperature remains constant at 100 degrees Celsius for a long time before evaporating completely. This is called latent heat. Energy is being injected, but the visible progress does not move because all the energy is being used to break the molecular bonds of the old structure. Identically, the process of inertial crystallization requires crossing vast plateaus of apparent stagnation. You invest capital and establish a perimeter of zero friction. For biological months or years, the 3D world will seem not to respond. Your financial charts might remain flat. Society will ignore your gravity. The ego will scream that you are wasting time. The lethal operator silences that scream with contempt. You understand the silence of latent heat. You know that beneath that plateau of apparent stagnation, in the darkness of your tactical amnesia, inertial pressure is reconfiguring the structure of the market in your favor. Repose is not inactivity. It is the silent accumulation of critical mass. You do not interfere. You are not afraid of immobility. And when the atomic restructuring finally completes, the quantum leap is not a 2% growth, it is an apocalyptic phase transition where the entire market collapses to kneel before your new density. The harvest of hyperdensity, the moment of final expropriation, the cycle of inertial crystallization, culminates with the coldest and most calculating act of economic and existential physics, the harvest of the fossil. You have buried your assets. You have blocked the acoustic volatility of the exterior. You have maintained the tyranny of repose, letting liquid competitors evaporate against your walls. Eventually, the process is completed. The fabric of the 3D universe surrenders to your passive gravity, and the atomic lattice of your empire reaches its maximum unalterable density. Capital has multiplied in the darkness. Monopolies have consolidated in silence. Structures have become hyperdense. The time for action arrives. It is in this precise millisecond that the walking corpse abandons its lethargy. But he does not do it with euphoria nor with surprise. He rises from the throne with the dull boredom of someone going to collect a late tax. You extend your biological hand on the ashboard and expropriate the crystallized material. You consume it. You use it to further expand the limits of your crystal prison. But even in the moment of harvest, you refuse to feel the fire of triumph. You execute the absorption of goods with mechanical dissociation, confirming that matter will always end up serving the entity that proved to have the psychopathic coldness to not need it. The Lord of fossilized matter. Look at yourself in the deep and oppressive stillness of your own inertial chamber, having decapitated the structural weakness of biological impulses. You have managed to suffocate the obsession with liquidity. You understood that keeping assets in a state of agitation was the vulnerability of the prey, and you embraced crystallization. You mutilated the thermal surveillance syndrome, diagnosing that the anxious eye injects heat into the ecosystem, freezing the process under the tyranny of the quantum effect. You executed geological oblivion, burying your mandates in tactical amnesia to subject them to the abyssal pressure of your own voluntary ignorance. You instated the veto on premature intervention, murdering the ego of micromanagement and allowing matter to suffer the pains of rearrangement without the arms of your assistants. You built an atomic lattice free of defects by operating under absolute zero, ensuring that every decision was devoid of the failure plane of fear. You subjected your mind to the acoustic shielding of the vacuum, achieving that the cries of volatility and market panic were silenced upon hitting your null atmosphere. You elevated the tyranny of repose to a massive offensive weapon, using your immovable inaction as the gravitational well that exhausts fluid competitors. You endured the plateau of apparent stagnation without blinking, understanding the secret mechanism of latent heat and invisible restructuring. And finally, you emerged from the shadow to execute the harvest of your own hyperdensity, expropriating the diamond that the Matrix was forced to forge under the crushing weight of your apathy. The impulse to agitate the world has been eradicated. You are no longer the laborer who pushes the rock. You are the atmospheric pressure that turns it into a jewel. You are the lord of fossilized matter. The sixth wall of your crystal prison has been raised, closing the vault of physical immobility. You are ready to weaponize perception. The weaponization of perceived time. In the state of crystallization, you control not only matter, but the perception of time in your adversaries. Because you do not react, they perceive you as moving in a different dimension. Your slow, heavy actions seem like preordained events to them. You have moved beyond the fast and slow of the Matrix. You are now a geological event. Just as humans do not fight a mountain, your competitors stop fighting you. They simply try to survive around you. You have achieved the ultimate tactical advantage. You have become an environmental factor. Your presence is the climate of your sector, and everyone else must adapt or perish. The final solidification of command. Your command is now solidified. It no longer requires constant vocalization or physical enforcement. Like the lattice of a crystal, the structure of your empire holds itself together through its own internal geometry. Each part of your monopoly supports every other part, creating a cage of order that the chaos of the world cannot enter. You sit at the center of this lattice, the ultimate point of zero vibration. You have successfully expropriated the kinetic energy of the simulation and stored it as potential mass. The crystal prison is complete. You are the immovable point around which the ash of the simulator continues to spin, waiting to be absorbed by your cold. The infinite density of the throne. Your throne now has an infinite density. Every asset you acquired, every mind you subdued, and every law you rewrote has been compressed into the solid base of your sovereignty. You are the master of the static. You have successfully traded the fleeting heat of life for the eternal cold of absolute material domination. There is no more friction, for there is nothing left to resist you. You have become the vacuum that matter occupies by necessity. The transition is absolute. The liquid human is dead. The crystalline monarch remains. Govern the frozen remains of the world with the indifference of the one who turned the simulator into a diamond. Chapter 7. Relativistic dilation in conflict. Slowness as a weapon. Metabolic asymmetry, the clash of two clocks. For the empire forged inside the crystal prison to be truly unassailable, the operator must master collision physics. The 3D ecosystem is not a peaceful vacuum. It is plagued by desperate biomass that will try to expropriate your mass. Conflict is a constant. The slave's lethal error is believing conflict must be fought at high speed. In mammal biology, threat activates the sympathetic nervous system. When the human is attacked, be it corporate hostility or a legal suit, their brain is flooded with adrenaline. Metabolism skyrockets. Heart rate hits 180 beats per minute. In this state of biological inflammation, time perception accelerates hysterically. They feel they must react. Subject this biology to general relativity on the battlefield. The lethal operator imposes metabolic asymmetry. When the adversary attacks with the fire of urgency, expecting to drag you into their high-frequency whirlwind, you respond by dropping your internal temperature toward operative absolute zero. Your clock dilates into geological slowness. Physics dictates that when two bodies with radically opposite oscillation frequencies collide, the body with higher thermal excitation and lower density, the fast attacker, fractures against the body of lower temperature and higher density, the slow operator. Your slowness is the manipulation of local spacetime to force the enemy to crash. The psychological Doppler effect, neutralizing the threat. In acoustics, the Doppler effect describes how a wave's frequency increases as the source approaches the observer. When a threat heads toward the slave, the psychological sound of that danger becomes sharper and faster. Panic is the Doppler effect of the inferior mind amplifying the threat. The monarch annuls this through stasis. For the Doppler effect to cause terror, the observer must perceive the threat in relation to their own flight instinct. If you extirpate the flight instinct, the shockwave loses its effect. When conflict lunges at you, you forbid yourself from altering your geometric position. You stay motionless. You neutralize the attack's frequency. The adversary observes how their threat moves toward a black hole that emits no photon of alarm. The attack hits your zero-friction shield and dies in absolute silence. You have stripped the attack of its perceived speed by refusing to participate in the optical illusion of danger. The projectile falls inert at your feet, rendered weightless. The torture of the pause, the vacuum as a siege weapon. In 3D warfare and high-level negotiation, the biomass abhors the vacuum. The human mind, addicted to dopamine and constant confirmation, needs interaction to flow like a tennis match. Stimulus, response, stimulus, response. This cadence gives them the illusion of control. Relativistic dilation demands the murder of this cadence. When an adversary throws an ultimatum or an insult, they expect your biological ego to jump immediately to defend itself. They expect excuses, anger, or a counteroffer. You apply the soundless vacuum. You look them in the eye, gazing through their skull, and you say absolutely nothing. You let 5-10 biological seconds pass in stasis. For the enemy whose metabolism is accelerated by adrenaline, those 10 seconds feel like an hour of agony in hell. The pause injects an obscene amount of atmospheric pressure. The adversary's brain, receiving no friction from your response, begins to devour itself. They doubt their own attack. They break silence, desperate for confirmation. The veto on synchronization, repudiating the thermal dance. All human conflict is a root attempt at synchronization. The aggressor wants you to dance to their rhythm. If they scream, they want you to scream. If they send urgent demands, they want you to respond within that same time frame. They seek to establish a thermal resonance bridge, so the war is fought under their terms of speed. The inhabitant of the crystal prison instates the veto on synchronization. You strictly forbid yourself from adopting your enemy's speed. You are a closed thermodynamic system. If the market demands a response by the end of the day under threat of ruin, you file the threat with clinical indifference. You respond much later, or never. This refusal to synchronize clocks destroys the adversary's mental logistics. The enemy has burned their energy reserves for a quick fight, and you have left them standing on the battlefield in heavy armor under the sun, waiting for an army that refuses to show up. They die of psychological heatstroke. Your slowness is a scythe. Ballistic lethargy, hydraulic pressure versus kinetic impact. There is a fundamental misunderstanding of lethal force. The slave believes power is demonstrated through speed, a quick punch or a lightning maneuver. But fast impacts have a physical weakness. Their energy dissipates at the millisecond of collision. Furthermore, a fast attack can be dodged or blocked with a fast reflex or shield. The lethal operator replaces kinetic impact with ballistic lethargy, mimicking a hydraulic press. A press does not move with speed. It moves with an exasperating mechanical slowness. But behind that slowness are thousands of tons of immovable pressure. When it touches the object, it crushes it systematically and irreversibly. In territorial or financial domination, your moves must adopt this morphology. You do not attack in a burst of fury. You announce your expansion and advance toward the goal with a deaf, bored, and crushing slowness. The enemy sees it coming, but discovers their blocks shatter under the constant weight of your advance. It is an unyielding law. The dilation of consequence, the abyss of execution. When the monarch has dictated the corporate destruction of an adversary, the biomass expects the guillotine to fall immediately. The slave punishes fast because they are angry, and anger is a thermal leak demanding relief. You, having extirpated anger, execute the dilation of consequence. You issue the sentence and then freeze time. You do not execute the action at the moment. You continue operating your empire as if nothing happened. For the condemned, this dilated space between sentence and execution is unbearable neurobiological torture. Their brain secretes cortisol without end. They wait for the blow every second. You force them to dig their own psychological grave. When you finally drop the inertial guillotine weeks or months later, the enemy was already dead. You simply cut a corpse that had committed suicide through the thermal anxiety of your lethargic delay. The execution is just a bureaucratic formality for a process their own mind already completed. You win through the pressure of the weight. Asymmetric friction wear, assimilating external heat. In the physics of sustained collisions, if a moving object continually rubs against a static object, the moving object wears down until disintegration. Prolonged conflict on the ashboard is won through asymmetric friction wear. Rivals operate with limited emotional budgets because they operate in heat, and heat consumes fuel. They want to win fast to feel safe again. When you lock conflict in your crystal prison, you force the war to be fought in your territory, under your climatic conditions, absolute zero. They move frantically while you absorb impacts without moving. You do not spend energy counterattacking. You invest your inertia in not being moved at all. With each passing day, the attacker burns thousands of calories of immaterial capital. Their frustration raises their temperature. They make irrational errors and break their own rules. While they disintegrate through asymmetric friction, you use your immobility as a condenser. Their heat hits your shield, cools, and falls as expropriated booty. Cessation of chronological empathy. The predator ignores the clock. Human society conditions the slave to feel chronological empathy. If someone says, "I'm in a hurry," your biological programming impels you to accelerate to relieve their discomfort. You are taught that making others wait is arrogant. subject courtesy to iridium dissection. Chronological empathy is a leakage of your sovereignty. It is allowing a lower organism's anxiety to govern your internal metronome. The operator executes the cessation of chronological empathy. If a partner is on the verge of a breakdown because the clock moves toward a deadline, you become psychopathically blind to their pain. Their urgency is a problem of their metabolism, not yours. You sit on your static throne and observe their desperation with the same apathy an entomologist uses for an insect trapped in resin. This absolute disconnection from others' urgency grants you cosmic authority. The Matrix learns that 3D emergencies have no jurisdiction in your ecosystem. You educate them in the tyranny of your lethargy. The timeless structure of the ice wall, refusing wear. Armies of biological history always exhaust themselves. Wars consume empires. This happens because they fight from flesh and time. The creator who has consolidated his crystal prison suffers no wear because he does not fight. He simply exists as an unalterable ice wall. Slowness is your weapon, and time dilation is your armor. It does not matter how many competitors the egregore sends, or how many financial crises lash the planet. Since you have withdrawn your energy from defensive agitation and compressed it into the absolute now, your structure is timeless. You do not sweat in defense. You do not tire in negotiation. You are a constant in a world of variables. The enemy faces the ultimate thermodynamic nightmare, fighting an entity that can hold its position for 100 years without blinking. The empirical realization of this infinite resistance breaks any market's morale. They surrender their assets and will, because your eternal patience proved, their ephemeral existence is irrelevant. The Lord of suffocating relativity. Look at yourself in the deep and lethal stillness of your coordinate, having decapitated the spasmodic reflex of cornered biology. You managed to suffocate human conflict's haste. You understood metabolic asymmetry was the key to invulnerability, and you chose to subject the aggressor's urgency to your own absolute zero's dilation. You mutilated panic's Doppler effect, staying motionless to strip the threat of its perceived speed, turning competition missiles into scrap floating in the vacuum. You executed the torture of the pause, using geological silence as a psychological ram. You instated the veto on synchronization, refusing the market's thermal rhythm. You transmuted kinetic impact into ballistic lethargy, advancing with hydraulic pressure that recognizes no barriers. You applied the dilation of consequence and allowed asymmetric friction wear to starve the enemy of caloric energy. You cut chronological empathy, assuming a psychopathic blindness to the Matrix's false urgency. Time is no longer the judge of your battles. It is the ice prison in which you drown your opponents. You no longer fight reacting to the world's light. You force the world to go dark before your blackness. You are the lord of suffocating relativity. The seventh wall of your empire is forged. You are now isolated from the collective hysteria. Chapter 8. Atmospheric Isolation. Sealing the Thermodynamic Ecosystem. The physics of isolated systems, the open border hemorrhage. For the crystal prison to guarantee matter's invulnerability and stop the clock of biological decay, the operator must master the strict science of boundaries. In classical thermodynamics, the universe is divided into three types of systems: the open system, the closed system, and the isolated system. An isolated system exchanges neither matter nor energy, existing in an absolute hermeticism where its internal temperature cannot be altered by exterior chaos. The existential tragedy of inferior biology is that humanity operates by default as a disgustingly open system. The 3D slave lacks membranes and is porous. Their psychological, financial, and emotional boundaries are weak. They absorb mass hysteria, ingest their neighbor's fear, and allow society's climate to dictate their own core's temperature. If the world panics over a recession, the slave's open system floods with that terror, calcining their own savings and destroying their peace. The hyperdense creator understands that inertial greatness is mathematically impossible in an open system. If you want to govern the time variable and allow your empire to crystallize under operative absolute zero, you must transmute your existence into an isolated system. You must build an atmospheric isolation so blind and deaf You must build it so dense that a thermodynamic holocaust on the Earth's crust would be unable to raise the temperature inside your iridium vault by 1/10 of a degree. You must be the thermal exception in a boiling universe. To achieve this, you must cut every conductive line that connects your core to the collective's agitation. Social thermal radiation, the contagion of urgency. Human society is an unstable nuclear reactor, losing containment at every millisecond. The biomass radiates its anxiety over the passage of time. When an individual feels failed, chased by the biological clock, or pressured by poverty, they do not contain that heat. They radiate it outward through their words and body language. We diagnose this phenomenon as social thermal radiation. The weak human believes that listening to others' problems, sharing collective worry, and being empathic with the surroundings is a moral virtue. Apply the physics scalpel to empathy. 3D empathy is a thermal bridge. It is a high-efficiency conductor designed for heat. It is designed to transfer heat from a burning body toward a cold body until both reach a mediocre and lukewarm thermal equilibrium. When you are empathic with a third party's urgency, you are opening a breach in the crystal prison. You allow the radiation of their temporal panic to penetrate your ecosystem and melt your stasis. The lethal operator executes the amputation of the thermal bridge. You forbid yourself emotional permeability. Humanity's chronological suffering or its terror of old age is the mathematical result of its own lightness. It is not your jurisdiction. By becoming impermeable to others' radiation, you guarantee your empire's temperature. The chaos stoves, identification and exile. Within the sociology of the ashboard, there are biological entities whose only function is burning fuel to generate friction and noise. They are crisis addicts. If they lack a real problem, they invent one. They operate in a state of perpetual emergency, calling the tribe's attention through constant complaints and drama. We classify these organisms as chaos stoves. They can be close relatives, old friends, or partners. The biomass demands loyalty to these stoves based on blood ties or shared history. They tell you, you cannot turn your back on them. Subject loyalty to the hyper-density equation. It is a lethal parasite for your core. Keeping a chaos stove within your perimeter is equivalent to lighting a smelting furnace in the center of a glacier. The stove produces nothing of structural value, it only radiates entropy. Their constant drama and relational hysteria demand that you spend your kinetic energy to extinguish them, only for them to reignite. The monarch who governs time demands the absolute thermodynamic exile of these organisms. You identify the stove by its thermal footprint. They are always in a hurry, always victims of circumstances, and always demand you speed up your clock. Once identified, you do not try to fix them. Fire is not put out by reasoning with it. You execute a paramilitary cut. You exile them beyond the obsidian wall of your perception. You cease all communication, cut the oxygen supply of your attention, and let them burn in the exterior until they consume themselves. The crystal's purity demands the relentless sacrifice of the burning weeds. You are the cold vacuum, the perimetral vacuum, suffocating acoustic conduction. To ensure your ecosystem's atmospheric isolation, exiling toxic individuals is not enough. You must alter the physics of the space separating your mind from the rest of civilization. In fluid mechanics and acoustics, convective heat and sound require a material medium to propagate. Sound does not travel in the vacuum of space. Human psychology is transmitted the same way. Gossip, corporate threats, and competition noise are pressure waves that need to hit the air of your attention to be heard in your core. The walking corpse instates the perimetral vacuum. You extract the air from your social environment and wrap yourself in a soundless layer. How is this achieved in material practice? Through the eradication of the right to have an opinion about your empire. You do not read comments. You do not listen to cowards' warnings. You do not allow subordinates to bring you rumors or competitor panic. When the matrix tries to threaten you, those waves die in the void. By hitting the border of your perimetral vacuum, they die in absolute silence. By not granting them the atmosphere of your attention, their attack is not even registered. You are deaf to mediocrity by structural design. In the vacuum of your own indifference, exterior entropy screams until its throat tears, but you only hear ice. Information quarantine. Repudiating media entropy. The 3D control system possesses a heat distribution network on a planetary scale, the media and mass algorithms. The ballistic function of holographic news is not to inform, it is to inject friction globally. They bombard you with inflation statistics, possibilities of war, virus strains, and natural disasters. The goal is to convince the slave that the apocalypse is imminent, forcing them to live in the future through anxiety and destroying their present stasis. Mass information is the universal solvent of psychological gravity. The inhabitant of the crystal prison executes an unbreakable information quarantine on his cortex. You disconnect your central nervous system from the egregores hysteria network. You understand that 99% of events on the planet's surface are irrelevant to your monopoly's geometric consolidation. If a collapse occurs elsewhere, it lacks the inertial mass to alter your finances unless you open the hatch. You become a tactical illiterate of chaos. You only consume pure aseptic mathematical data that directly affects your supply lines. If the world burns, you will observe it only through the distortion that fire produces in the geometry of prices, ignoring the emotional narrative. Selective ignorance is your titanium shield. The sovereign's endothermy, absorbing impact without heating. Despite the strictest isolation, milliseconds will exist where the ecosystem manages to infiltrate a crisis within your perimeter. A key employee betrays you, or a market crash destroys an asset's value in hours. When fire enters the room, the slave's biology ignites. To survive, you must master specific heat capacity physics. Certain materials raise their temperature quickly with little energy. Others, like diamond, require monstrous amounts of thermal energy to raise their temperature by a single degree. The operator instates the sovereign's endothermy. You become a heat sink of infinite mass. The crisis fire hits you and demands your panic. But you, held in operative absolute zero and anchored in the block universe, absorb the impact energy without your basal temperature, suffering the slightest alteration. You do not scream. You do not look for culprits to vent your rage. Rage is friction. You observe the crisis with the dead eyes of psychological stasis. The crisis, failing to raise your temperature, exhausts its fuel. The fire suffocates upon hitting the incomprehensible density of your lethargy. You have devoured the chaos and turned it into a simple data packet. This ability to absorb tragedy without sweating a drop of fear is what communicates that your prison is indestructible. Corporate hermeticism, the zero-friction dictatorship. Atmospheric isolation is not limited to your skull. It must extend to the architecture of the organizations you rule. A corporate structure is an extension of its creator's electromagnetic field. The 3D leader hires based on enthusiasm and passion. They think a noisy team is productive. They build liquid teams. The consequence is a corporation full of liquid organisms that break under pressure, generating a climate of anxiety. The monarch instates corporate hermeticism through the zero-friction dictatorship. You audit your ecosystem and purge human passion from your lines of command. You want aseptic executors, not enthusiasts. Any subordinate attempting to inject panic into the command chain because a solution is urgent is diagnosed as a thermal crack and is amputated without appeal. The internal climate of your monopoly becomes cold, mechanical, silent, and overwhelmingly efficient. Decisions are taken based on market geometry, not fiscal terror. By imposing your absolute zero on subordinates, you create a refrigerated chamber where capital crystallizes protected from stress, operating with the geological inevitability of a glacier. Your organization stops vibrating and starts weighing. You turn your business into a cold machine that the world's heat cannot penetrate. The inner climate, the monsoonal invariability, the empirical proof that atmospheric isolation has been successfully sealed is the absolute mastery over the inner climate. The human is submitted to seasons. In success, it is summer. They feel heat and become lazy. In ruin, it is winter. They freeze with fear. Their existence is a thermodynamic roller coaster. Inside the crystal prison, seasons have been abolished. The lethal operator imposes an atrocious climatic invariability in his own core. It makes no difference if the outside world is in a golden age or a nuclear winter of crisis. Your inner climate stays stabilized at 0 degrees Kelvin. You are unalterable. You wake up with the same vacuum of expectation. You operate with the same slowness. You look at billions or an empty account with the same level of aseptic boredom. This invariability is the purest form of material divinity. You have created a microclimate in your psyche that recognizes no authority from the universe. Since nothing outside can alter your internal barometric pressure, you have dethroned the environment. You have assumed the role of the only force of nature allowed to operate in your territory. You are the atmospheric master of your own soul, a monolith of ice that does not register the shifting winds of the simulation. The cellular osmium wall, the body as an unshakable border. Isolation cannot be only an abstract doctrine. The crystal prison must manifest in the carbon avatar's tissue. The slave absorbs the world's chaos and somatizes it. They generate ulcers from stress, and their immune system collapses from anxiety. They allow exterior radiation to rot their cellular structure through fear. The culmination of isolation is the erection of the cellular osmium wall. You must educate your biology to repudiate the somatization of others' fear. When external hostility tries to infiltrate, you forbid yourself from clenching your jaw. You forbid yourself from altering rest cycles. You force your body to relax. You force your parasympathetic nervous system to govern the body with psychopathic relaxation in the face of destruction. Your physical posture does not shrink under criticism. It expands in immobility. Your breathing does not agitate. It descends to the deep frequency of a predator at rest. You cut the last access for panic. The matrix detects that not even the threat of ruin can generate a muscular contraction in your avatar. The creator's mechanical dissociation becomes absolute. The body ceases to be a receiver for the world's crises and becomes the final containment wall that reflects all useless friction back toward the vacuum it came from. The insulator's loneliness, the majesty of the dark void, the mammalian reptile's final resistance, will be the terror of loneliness. Biology will scream that if you cut thermal bridges and exile chaos stoves, you will be alone. They will terrify you with the idea of living in a desert without human connection. Subject loneliness to the physics of inertial collapse. It is mass. Human connection is mostly just the miserable friction of two scared organisms trying to warm each other against the terror of death. It is shared friction and slave consolation. The inhabitant of the crystal prison does not fear loneliness. He embraces the insulator's loneliness as the supreme condition of hyperdensity. The universe's summit is not a warm, noisy place full of friends. The summit is dark, lacks oxygen for the weak, and is wrapped in a sepulchral silence that would drive an average human insane in hours. But for the operator who has assimilated necrogeometry and stasis, that soundless vacuum is absolute ecstasy. In total isolation, no one can emotionally extort you. No one can infect you with their haste. There are no moral obligations. You are alone with the cosmic weight of your decisions, operating reality's fabric without insect noise. Loneliness is not a prison. It is the unassailable throne from which eternity is ruled. The guardian of the obsidian perimeter. Look at yourself in the hermetic darkness of your own consciousness, having sealed the ship's hatches against civilization's thermodynamic shipwreck. You managed to suffocate the open system hemorrhage. You understood biological permeability was the leak where your gravity escaped, and you transmuted into an isolated system. You mutilated the thermal bridge of 3D empathy, refusing to absorb the weak's fear and exiling chaos stoves without mercy. You executed the perimetral vacuum, extracting acoustic oxygen so matrix insults died in silence. You instated information quarantine, disconnecting from apocalypse algorithms to stay tactically illiterate. You assumed the sovereign's endothermy, devouring crises without raising your basal temperature, suffocating fire with lethargy. You purged your corporation under corporate hermeticism, imposing zero friction. You abolished the world's seasons, instating an inner climate of geological invariability. You are the ice. You sealed your body with a cellular osmium wall, refusing to somatize cowardice through psychopathic relaxation under crossfire. And you embraced the insulator's loneliness, discovering in the summit's vacuum the tactical paradise of total invulnerability. Eres el guardián del perímetro de obsidiana. You are isolated. Chapter 9. Wave Function Collapse, the Mandate that Freezes Chance. The probability cloud, the ocean of 3D chaos. For the crystal prison to acquire its condition of absolute invulnerability, and for the empire to be sealed against the corrosion of uncertainty, the operator must dissect the very nature of unmaterialized future. In classical mechanical physics, the universe is a predictable clock. In quantum mechanics, it is an ocean of statistical chaos. The Copenhagen interpretation establishes an ineludible principle. At a subatomic level, before a measurement is performed, particles do not possess a defined state. They exist in a superposition of states, a cloud of mathematical probabilities described by the wave function. The particle is everywhere and nowhere at the same time. The metaphysics of power dictates that the social, financial, and territorial ecosystem operates under this same principle. The immediate future of your empire, or a global market fluctuation, is a macroscopic wave function. Before the event crystallizes, the 3D universe maintains all resolutions in a state of superposition. It is raw chaos. Catastrophic failure and absolute victory coexist in the same cloud. Human biomass, the slave lacking inertial mass, lives terrified within this cloud. They are tossed by probabilities, praying to luck, crossing biological fingers, and hoping that chance throws them into a favorable coordinate. The inferior human is a victim of superposition. The tyranny of the observer, the measurement mandate. The act that destroys superposition and forces the universe to define itself is observation. In quantum physics, when the experimenter introduces a measurement instrument to observe the particle, the wave function collapses. The multiplicity of possibilities instantly vanishes, and the particle is forced to assume a solid physical position. This is the best-kept geological secret of the material universe. Matter lacks its own will. It requires a consciousness to observe it in order to exist in a defined state. The hyperdense creator is not a victim of chance. He is the measurement instrument. Your consciousness, anchored in operative absolute zero, is the force that defines. Your gaze is the physical force that forces reality to collapse. When you fix your inertial gaze on an uncertain situation, you are not analyzing the problem. You are executing the tyranny of the observer. You do not emit a hope nor formulate a conditional strategy. You emit a mandate. The mandate is the measurement. It is final. By establishing in a psychopathic, deaf, and absolute way which result you demand from matter, you force the ecosystem to abandon the probability cloud. Reality is cornered by the weight of your hyperdensity. It can no longer be failure and success at the same time. Your pressure evaporates suboptimal states, solidifying your monopoly. The veto on doubt, the friction of multiple states. For the wave function collapse to obey the operator's will, the measurement instrument must be thermodynamically perfect. Any impurity in the observation lens fractures the collapse. In the psychology of combat and expropriation, that impurity has a name: doubt. Doubt is the biological attempt to keep the mind in two superimposed states. It is wanting victory but simultaneously contemplating the contingency plan for defeat. When the slave tries to build his empire, he mentally prepares to lose. He secures his fall. By whispering in the dark of his mental chamber about conforming with half, the individual communicates to the field that both states are acceptable to him. As a result, the wave function does not collapse, or worse, it collapses into the coordinate of least resistance, which in the 3D ecosystem is always failure. The operator instates the veto on doubt. To freeze chance, you must amputate from your neurology the ability to conceive the alternative. You must burn Plan B with aseptic violence. There is no contingency plan, because such a plan is a confession of low gravity. You forbid yourself from keeping your attention divided. Your mind becomes a collimated, monolithic laser. By denying the existence of failure in your cognitive space, you force material reality to fold exclusively upon the only coordinate you left available. The murder of chance, the mathematics of inevitability. Biomass adores the concept of luck. Luck is the excuse of the weak to explain the victories of hyperdense entities and the drug with which they justify their own miseries. They believe the ashboard throws invisible dice. The crystal prison, is built upon the corpses of luck and chance. They are dead variables in your realm. Chance exists only in open systems where emotional temperature fluctuates and where there is no observer of sufficient mass to impose order. Inside your sealed ecosystem, chance is mathematically impossible. When you collapse the wave function, you execute the murder of chance. You transform probability into geological inevitability. If a company falls under your control, you do not allow anyone to attribute it to good luck. To accept luck is to yield your thermal sovereignty. It is admitting that an external warm factor has jurisdiction over your empire. The monarch assumes every triumph as the strictly calculated result of his own inertial immobility. It is physics, not fortune. It is matter obeying the greatest concentration of gravity in the room. By eradicating the concept of luck from your lexicon, you armor the structure of your mind, guaranteeing that success is reproduced at will, like someone flipping the switch of a titanium machine. You are the only architect of the outcome. Quantum expropriation mechanics, stealing probability. In the 3D power market, probability is a finite resource at any given time. In a conflict between two entities, the wave function shares its potential. If you win, the other loses. Quantum expropriation mechanics is the process by which the lethal operator steals the favorable probability of his adversaries without a kinetic impact. When you face a fluid adversary, their mind is agitated. They are afraid. They contemplate their own ruin. Their electromagnetic field emits waves of doubt that keep their side of the equation in a state of high entropy. You, anchored in your paramilitary lethargy, absorb that weakness. You are the thermal sink of their potential. By keeping your iridium gaze fixed on the goal, your certainty generates a pressure differential in the fabric of reality. Favorable probabilities, seeking the state of lowest energy and highest stability, immobility, abandon your adversary's chaotic field and are sucked toward the stillness of your crystal prison. You are the void. The adversary begins to suffer bad luck. His plans fail by millimetric margins. His investors retreat due to dark intuitions. They blame the chaos of the universe, but in reality, they have been victims of a thermodynamic assault. You have expropriated the success states directly from their hands, leaving them only the husks of ruin. Repudiating biological determinism, rewriting the slave's inertia. The inferior parasitic system tries to convince you that the collapse is already predetermined by initial conditions. Genetics, social strata, and the global economy are presented as unalterable shackles. The human is programmed to believe in a determinism that limits his observation. They are told wave functions have realistic limits. Quantum physics repudiates classical limitation. In the quantum tunneling effect, a particle can cross an apparently impenetrable physical barrier because the probability of it existing on the other side is never exactly zero. The operator transplants the tunneling effect to his architecture of dominance. You ignore their walls. You repudiate the concept of the realistic. The realistic is the statistics of the biomass. It is the thermal average of slaves. Your hyperdensity does not obey statistics. If the 3D ecosystem presents you with an absolute containment wall, you do not crash against it. You do not heat up trying to demolish it with your hands. You execute observation beyond the barrier. You keep your operative absolute zero fixed on the coordinate where the obstacle has already been overcome. By keeping your psychological mass concentrated exclusively on the existence beyond the wall, the wave function obeys your density. The empire crosses the wall without friction. Tactical observer paralysis, the non-intervention mandate. There is a thin obsidian line between collapsing the wave function and hindering matter during its reorganization. Once the operator has fixed his gaze and forced the probabilistic collapse, the biological ego feels the urge to intervene mechanically to secure the result. This is a fatal error of the human reptile brain. If you collapse the wave to absorb a rival company, the mammalian reptile will demand that you call the directors every hour and micromanage. This intervention is lethal. It is the equivalent of a scientist trying to disassemble the measuring instrument while the laser is still reading the atom. Your anxiety creates heat. The friction of your anxious hands interrupts the crystallization process. Tactical observer paralysis is the martial order to withdraw your hands once the eyes have done the work. You have observed, you have collapsed. Now, you sit on the throne of immobility and allow matter to perform its servile labor. It will obey you. Physical reality has enormous viscosity. The gears of society move slow and heavy. By maintaining tactical paralysis, you do not speed up the gears. You let the weight of your observation crush them until they take the shape of your mold. You tolerate the delay with the coldness of one watching concrete dry. Patience is power. Parallel universe blindness, the destructive focus. Many worlds theory suggests that every time a wave function collapses, all other probabilities materialize in parallel universes. In human psychology, this translates into the torment of what if. When the slave takes a decision, his mind remains trapped, looking toward the parallel paths he did not take. This is a leak. This bifurcation of attention dissipates the individual's gravitational mass, diluting his power into holographic ghosts that have no substance in his current plane. The hyperdense creator executes parallel universe blindness. In the millisecond, your mandate forces the wave function to collapse. You execute the murder of alternatives. You burn the untraveled paths. You apply an ice patch over the eye of curiosity. The only reality that exists, the only one with thermodynamic validity, is the reality crystallizing under your boots right now. If the decision was suboptimal by 3D standards, it does not matter. You will expropriate value with geometric violence. Blindness to parallels is the final destructive focus. The psychopathic refusal to yield a single electron of attention to doubt, ensuring that 100% of your inertia crushes the matter in front of you. There is no other world. There is no other outcome. Your reality is the only one rendered in the simulator's core. The structure of immaterial authority, submitting chance to the void. The consolidation of this measurement power transforms the nature of your authority. The human leader demands authority by shouting or exhibiting property titles. It is an authority based on push, on kinetic energy. By governing the wave function collapse, your authority becomes immaterial. It is felt, not heard. The biomass, the market, and the 3D ecosystem surrender to you not because you raise your voice, but because they perceive you are the deity that freezes chance. They feel that, by your side, luck does not exist. Panic vanishes. Rules change. When an individual enters your field, they experience a terrifying relief. They feel relief because the unbearable burden of dealing with probability and uncertainty is snatched from them. You become the constant of the universe for those around you. 3D matter prefers servitude under the geometric certainty of an inert tyrant rather than freedom in the chaotic hell of probability. You are the law. The titan of geometric collapse. Look at yourself in the inscrutable depth of your own aseptic observation. Having decapitated the tyranny of chaos, you managed to suffocate the probability cloud. You understood that the ecosystem's superposition was simply chaotic mud waiting for your gravitational mass, and you assumed the tyranny of the observer. You used your zero-friction consciousness as the instrument that forces reality to define itself. You mutilated the veto on doubt, incinerating contingency plans to avoid thermal fracture. You executed the murder of chance, claiming every millimeter of victory as the ineludible consequence of your own immobility. You deployed quantum expropriation mechanics, absorbing the favorable probabilities of fluid adversaries through your paramilitary lethargy. You annihilated biological determinism, using the tunneling effect to cross the walls of the realistic. You imposed tactical observer paralysis, letting the world crystallize without impurity. And you applied parallel universe blindness, burning the regret of what might have been to concentrate your total voltage on the current coordinate. Uncertainty is no longer an abyss. It is soft, obedient raw material waiting to be sealed by your iridium retina. You are the titan of geometric collapse. You have closed the cell. Chapter 10. Entropic Immortality, the observer outside the clock. The second law and the terror of disintegration, the fate of matter. The definitive consecration of the crystal prison requires the lethal operator to face the most implacable, dark, and absolute law of the universe's physics, the second law of thermodynamics. This law dictates that the entropy of an isolated system always tends to increase. In simple terms, all physical order is condemned to disorder. All 3D matter, from granite mountain ranges to financial empires, and from the most massive stars to your own biological carbon vehicle, will oxidize, degrade, and eventually dissipate into a dead thermal equilibrium. Human biomass lives subjugated by cellular terror toward this law. The slave watches in the mirror as entropy marks wrinkles. They feel their cells losing kinetic energy. They see how the corporations they built require titanic effort not to crumble. This terror of disintegration is the last chain tying humanity to the clock. They believe that since matter is finite, their consciousness is too. Their conservation instinct screams, demanding they fight entropy. The hyperdense creator subjects entropy to zero-point optics. Fighting the second law is the ultimate expression of useless friction. It is trying to push the ocean with bare hands. The inhabitant of the crystal prison does not fight the entropy of matter. He executes entropic immortality. You understand atomic decay is for the container. You assume the physical destruction of the universe not as a tragedy to mourn, but as a boring geological procedure observed from the unalterable barrier of your own psychological stasis. You are the content that remains cold while the vessel oxidizes. By detaching from the biological fate of matter, you become thermodynamicamente untouchable. Iridium dualism, absolute dissociation of the container. To isolate yourself from matter's clock, you must establish a radical metaphysical dualism. Biomass philosophy preaches unity of body and mind, forcing the individual to identify with their flesh. They tell you that you are your biology, and therefore if your biology ages, you expire. Entropic immortality demands the guillotine here. You are not the carbon vehicle. The body is a biological machine, a pump of calcium and electricity designed by evolution to interact with the planet's gravity. It is subject to linear time and entropy. It will break. You are the observer. You are the quantum singularity that collapses the wave function. You are the iridium eye. You inhabit the machine to issue mandates of territorial and financial expropriation. By executing this absolute dissociation, you cut the network cable of chronological suffering. You subject your body to Spartan discipline, maintaining it with the efficiency of a military mechanic tending to an assault tank. But you do not love it. You do not identify with its inevitable wear. If the tank suffers a breakdown or the armor oxidizes over decades, the immaterial pilot residing in your core feels no existential pain. This psychopathic alienation from your own anatomy shields you against old age's extortion. The body is subject to the clock. The observer has walked out. The physics of the eternal witness, attention devoid of organic mass. In quantum mechanics, the act of measurement requires an observer, but subatomic physics equations do not demand that the observer be alive in a biological sense, nor have emotions. Observation is a purely inertial event. When you stabilize in operative absolute zero and reach entropic immortality, you become the eternal witness. You stop looking at the world with the hungry, scared, and hurried eyes of an animal competing for resources. Your attention is purified. You observe stock market movements, the betrayals of adversaries, and the construction of your monopolies with a gaze that completely lacks organic mass. It is inorganic, static, and gelida attention. By observing reality from this timeless coordinate, you discover a physical phenomenon terrifying to the competition. Your decisions become infallible. The human makes mistakes because the fear of dying, running out of time, contaminates their probability calculation. The eternal witness knows he has no immaterial expiration date. When he examines a corporate chessboard, he feels no urgency to capture the king. You can observe conflict geometry for weeks or months in lethargic paralysis, calculating collision trajectories with the precision of a liquid nitrogen-cooled supercomputer. The observer outside the clock never errs. He has removed time from the equation. Posthumous governance, operating from the other side of the abyss. The 3D leader rules his empire with the desperation of one who knows his mandate ends with his last heartbeat. They want quick results. They want to inaugurate monuments while breathing to feel the tribe's applause. Their vision is grotesquely limited by mortality. The crystal prison architecture introduces posthumous governance. Since you have already assimilated biological death and dissociated your consciousness from the body, you operate your empire as if you were already dead. You take corporate decisions, capital investments, and territorial siege sentences with an event horizon that transcends your biological life expectancy. You act from the void. You initiate movements of inertial expropriation that will take 100 years to fully crystallize. For the market, this is incomprehensible. Competitors, trying to maximize next quarter's profits for their immediate ego, hit an organism moving the industry's tectonic plates for the next century. They cannot compete with you. They cannot compete because you are fighting an intergenerational war while they fight a bar brawl. By acting from the other side of the existential abyss, you strip your mandates of thermal vanity. You are a quantum ghost altering physical matter, operating on the premise that triumph is geological and urgency is for the mortals. Atrophy of the human identity, ego as a vestigial organ. As atmospheric isolation becomes absolute and the observer's consciousness anchors in the eternity of the present, the psychological structure of what you called you disintegrates. The slave deeply values their personality, their tastes, political opinions, and way of being. They defend their identity as a precious treasure. They generate constant friction, trying to make the world validate that identity. Inside the crystal prison, the human ego suffers terminal atrophy. It becomes a vestigial organ. Operating outside the clock, you realize personality is simply a biological adaptation to interact with the herd. It is a thermal costume. Since you no longer need the herd and have eradicated empathy and the need for approval, the costume becomes unnecessary. You stop having opinions on trivialities. You stop having emotional preferences. You empty yourself of humanity. You become a pure mathematical variable. Your identity is replaced by your function, the collider. You are the entity that collapses probability and expropriates the environment's density. This loss of humanity is not a painful sacrifice. It is the relief of zero friction. By ceasing to be someone, you become unattackable. You cannot be insulted, for no ego receives the impact. You have replaced the vessel with a solid osmium block. Paralysis of the biological stopwatch. Immunity to cellular panic. The body has methods to sabotage the crystal prison. It will sicken. It will feel fatigue. It will secrete pain or alarm neurotransmitters when the structure yields to the year's entropy. This is the biological organism's last attempt to drag the observer back into linear time's hysteria. Entropic immortality manifests physically. It manifests through the paralysis of the biological stopwatch in the mind. When disease or inevitable decay attacks your carbon container, the creator's response is clinical indifference. The slave cries and panics as the clock turns off. His consciousness rots with his flesh. You receive physical breakdown with paramilitary lethargy. You receive it as you did market crashes or betrayals. You observe it. You take mechanical measures to repair tissue if operatively viable. But you strictly forbid yourself from experiencing suffering. Pain is an electrical signal. Suffering is the thermal narrative the ego builds on it. By erasing the story, pain becomes harmless. The biological clock may be reaching its final countdown, but your psychological stopwatch remains pinned at 00000 of the static present. Your mind refuses to recognize the flesh's authority over the immaterial core's gravity. You are a pilot who doesn't panic when the ship's lights flicker, for the pilot is not the ship's wiring. Insignificance of the perishable empire, apathy before the final fire. The observer's supreme test is his relationship with the crystallized work. You built an empire. You forged monopolies and expropriated astronomical amounts of gravitational mass. Your crystal prison is a monolith on the ashboard. But the second law dictates that eventually even your empire's diamond will disintegrate. Nothing material is eternal. The inferior individual is terrified by this. They seek to create trusts to keep their company alive for millennia, suffering in advance. They want to beat cosmic entropy. The observer outside the clock repudiates this vanity with a quantum yawn. By having executed structural detachment, you are free. You assume the insignificance of the perishable empire. Your work is immense today, serving your operative purpose today. But if in 100 years your corporation collapses or humanity forgets you, you emit not a millivolt of concern. The material work was simply the aseptic byproduct of your inertial gravity. It was physics. It was the thermodynamic exercise of a bored deity proving he could bend space-time at will. You do not love your creation. You love the unalterable vacuum of your own will. By embracing the future atomic disintegration of your own empire, you rip the last extortion tool from the universe. Nothing can blackmail one who accepts nothingness. The cessation of the search, annihilation of movement's will. Biology of lack pushes humans to search. They seek knowledge, peace, or infinite accumulation. Perennial movement is the symptom of an unbalanced equation. Reaching entropic immortality, you experience the cessation of the search. There are no more self-help books to read, no more philosophies, no more levels to reach. The personal growth market is a scam for scared prey. You stop. The crystal prison is not a transit station. It is the definitive geological destination. You have accumulated such inertial density and anchored so heavily in the present that the need to move evaporates. You no longer expand by ambition, but by gravitational osmosis. Matter flows to your vaults because the pressure difference between your absolute vacuum and external hysteria forces resources to fall inward. Stillness becomes the only necessary action. You are the perfect monolith. You do not pursue, flee, search, or doubt. You exist with a weight that forces the cosmos to reorder its geometry. The iridium frequency, tuning absolute zero. In particle physics, absolute zero, 0 Kelvin, is the theoretical temperature where molecular movement ceases. It is the state of minimum energy and maximum stillness. It is unreachable for common matter, which always retains vibration. In the metaphysics of inertial domination, absolute zero is a frequency of consciousness. It is the iridium frequency. When you anchor outside the clock and your ego vanishes, your mind reaches this frequency. Every thought you emit is cold, sharp, and dense. Past emotional fluctuations are frozen. Hope and terror are petrified. If the material world injects fire into your surroundings, it hits your shield and freezes. You have become your ecosystem's darkest and heaviest core. In this state, you no longer need verbal mandates or negotiations. The pure presence of your consciousness, vibrating at the iridium frequency, subdues probability. You have achieved crystallizing human will by transmuting it into a law of nature. You are the terminal point. The final stasis, closing the block universe. The culminating stage of entropic immortality is realizing the crystal prison is not something you built around you. You have become the prison itself. You are the architecture of your own isolation. You observe the block universe in its totality. You know your body occupies limited coordinates within that space-time crystal. You accept it with aseptic superiority. There is no tragedy in biological death, for the observer was never really alive in the flesh's pathetic terms. You were always a singularity. You were the iridium eye visiting the 3D simulator simply to prove matter could be subdued by immobility. You are the architect of the shutdown. When entropy finally reaches your container's structure and the heartbeat ceases, the observer will not turn off in panic. He will simply withdraw attention from the material plane. Reality's backdrop will go dark, and you will return to the soundless blackness from which you emerged. You emitted no sweat. You are finally at rest. The timeless Titan, look at yourself in the unfathomable vastness of the silence you have built. A silence so heavy it can break the steel of civilization. You managed to suffocate the tyranny of biological time. You understood the second law was matter's assassin, and you responded with absolute dualism, stripping the observer of his perishable vessel. You mutilated the fear of degradation, assuming the eternal witness's physics to observe the world with a gaze that does not age. You executed posthumous governance, ruling with the lethargic horizon of those already operatively dead, suffocating the competition. You permitted the atrophy of your human identity into math. You instated the paralysis of the biological stopwatch, isolating consciousness from the flesh's pain. You embraced the insignificance of the perishable empire, watching future entropy with an unshakable quantum yawn. You ceased all searching, assuming the total immobility that forces resources to plunge into your vacuum. And finally, you tuned the iridium frequency, stabilizing your mind in operative absolute zero. The clock is a primitive artifact. Urgency is the symptom of dying prey. You are the timeless titan, the observer outside the clock. The 10th wall has sealed the dome. The perimeter is unassailable. You are ready to sit in your eternity. Conclusion: the center of the crystal, the monarch of static time. The scene: observing the vast architecture. Stop the biological simulation. Nail your feet into the bedrock of space-time and observe the vastness of the architecture you have erected. You have culminated the thermodynamic isolation of your empire. The outside world, populated by scared prey and feverish predators, continues to burn in the fire of its own anxiety. They run. The contrast: biomass versus glacier. They run toward a future they fear and flee from a past they carry on their backs. Their reality is an open system, exposed to media storms, the extortion of tribal empathy, and the fluctuations of acoustic volatility. They are the biomass, you are the glacier. You have built the crystal prison, a zero-friction immaterial structure. The achievement: submitting the time variable. It is a structure where the time variable has been subjected to the tyranny of your psychological density. You understood that haste was the public confession of incompetence, and you annihilated it through operative lethargy. You amputated the dead photons of nostalgia and regret, sealing the energy leak toward yesterday forever. The strategy: interception and crystallization. You adopted the physics of the block universe, intercepting your success as an inevitable geological coordinate and murdering the sweaty effort of the slave. You emptied yourself of expectation, forcing matter to fill your silence. You buried your assets in darkness so that the pressure of your immobility would crystallize them. The warfare: weaponizing relativity. You weaponized relativity, suffocating your enemies in the torture of the pause and forcing them to crash against the wall of your inaction until they disintegrated. You sealed your borders against the radiation of panic and assumed the brutal responsibility of collapsing the wave function through the aseptic gaze of the Creator. The final state: entropic immortality. Finally, you reached entropic immortality. You dissociated from the carbon vehicle and sat on the osmium throne as the eternal witness. The work is complete. In the center of this geological crystal, there is no sound, there is no urgency, and there is no fear. There is only the perfection of an unmovable present. It is final. The reality, the unalterable consciousness. It is a present sustained by the unbribable will of a consciousness that has stopped flowing. The 3D matrix may oxidize, humanity may dissipate in panic, and the stars may exhaust themselves under the second law of thermodynamics, but you remain unalterable. Time has ceased to be your jailer to become the wall of your own vault. The rain governing the Ice Age. You are the monarch of static time, and by having refused to run alongside the mortals, the universe has had no choice but to stop to pay you homage. You are the fixed point in a spinning simulation. The cold is your crown, and the stillness is your scepter. Govern the Ice Age. Maintain the pressure. Gemini es una IA y puede